go to chemist school, you became more alert. You more wake up, your spirit wake up. And you became a more human being. That's your character is built in a school. Classical studies, we must know Medu nature, you see. Maybe in the future we need to know some heretic too. We need to know Medu nature. Achievement in Kemet for me is education. The way they think, they build, and they practice their education is very unique in history. Without education, I believe there will be no Kemet.
All right. E.T. Imhotep. Welcome to the Seshu channel. This is your brother Wujau Menib Idimaat. And tonight we will have a very good discussion concerning the title of our video, which is To Greenberg or Not to Greenberg. Is it even a question? That's the title and topic of our discussion tonight. And I will have our panelists, our good brother Asar Imhotep, as well as my co-host Emikeraku Kenshai Akinyi. But before I bring the panelists on, I just wanted to, first of all, thank everyone for tuning in to the channel. Get your pens and pads out, get your note, get your tablet ready, because you will want to take notes. And just to give you all a little backdrop of the reason why I decided to do this live stream, just real quick summary backdrop, is that when it comes to languages and in our studies of ancient Egyptian culture, the language, of course, and the people, etc., language comes up a lot. And when you're dealing with language, we're dealing with linguistics and things of that nature. And there's been a lot of controversial statements, claims, debates, small and large, about the ancient Egyptian language itself. Is it an Afroasiatic language? Is it a Bantu language? And just what do those things mean? And so for the past 10 years, there's been discussions going back and forth on the YouTube streets, on Facebook, about the classification of African languages. And most people are familiar with the 4 African language phyla, and that being Afroasiatic, which is a very hot topic, Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, and Khoisan. And so that's what most people are familiar with when you talk about African languages and in terms of how they're grouped together. And so there's been a lot of controversy on where does ancient Egyptian fit in, and then the work and studies that we've been doing. So this has been going on for 10 years, back and forth, debating and things like that. And what I find is that over the 10 years, not too many people are competent within the information or in linguistics or in answering these kinds of questions. So tonight we're going to have a discussion on all of that and probably a little bit more. So I want to just bring on our panelists. We have Sonnet Imhotep. Excuse me, let me get everybody there. And Brother Asar Imhotep. So, welcome to the session and welcome to the panel. For those who don't know Asar Imhotep, let me just properly introduce the Brother Asar Imhotep. Asar Imhotep is an author, computer scientist, researcher, colleague of mine, consider a colleague, and he's published works dealing with Africology, ancient Egyptian culture, but mainly dealing with the tools of historical comparative linguistics. And I'm sure, Asar, we can run down his publications and put the links to them in the chat. But most of you all, as far as our audience, are already familiar with our good brother Asar Imhotep. So welcome to the panel, and want to introduce or any greeting words for everyone?
Well, peace and blessings, everyone. I'm glad to be back on this prestigious channel. Glad to and honored to share some information. Some of it's repeat if you are familiar with our past conversations, but for those of you who are new, gladly resharing some information. So some stuff that you're going to hear today may be new to you, but of course, everything is well sourced, and we encourage you to continue to study after the conversation. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for having me, and love and light. Can't wait to get started.
Okay, so again, I appreciate everyone tuned in, and we will be monitoring the chat a bit. Now, so how we're going to have this discussion, basically, I'm going to be picking Asar Imhotep's brain. I'm going to ask Asar a series of questions, and the spirit behind my questions is to clarify, to clear up, to clarify, and to refute some misunderstandings and some misinformation centered around historical comparative linguistics, as well as, the ancient Egyptian language, etc. So as I said, I've personally been involved with these types of conversations for the past 10 years. And so I'm familiar with the arguments, the confusion, and the claims. So I'm going to do my best to ask questions in picking Asar's brain so that we can get answers. And hopefully Asar will be able to demonstrate for us the evidence or the information to us and share with us that we can clarify these things once and for all. All right. So this will be a reference video. This hopefully be in the archives. You can share this video with those that you're familiar with where these issues come up. All right. So I'm just gonna dive in. So again, the title of our discussion is To Greenberg or Not to Greenberg. Is it even a question? And so what I want to start off with is, because we're dealing with linguistics, let's just start at the very beginning with the question. So this is my first question to you, Asar, is basically, what is linguistics, the study of, and two-part question. What is linguistics, and are all linguists made alike?
Alrighty. Okay, so I guess for this, and so keep in mind, audience, you're going to see me jump around because some of these questions, are answered in different slideshows that I've had in the past. So, um, so right now we're just gonna I'm gonna share my screen because I already have a slide for. Uh, well, I don't know if it's sharing.
Yep, it's sharing. There we go.
Oh my bad, I'm pressing buttons again. Uh, so let me know when it's sharing.
We see it, but it's showing the your desk. It's showing this actually showing our back end.
On
Do
the
you need to reshare? You probably need to reshare.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that Asar has to come right back in. So we're gonna wait for him. And I'm gonna keep up the conversation. So again, I thank everybody for tuning in uh, to our discussion for tonight. And again, I hope you all get your pens and paper ready to take some notes, because for far too long, like I said, it's been 10 years since we've been having these conversations, and the way I see it is it's just a lot of the different disagreements and quote unquote controversy centered around these issues is really due just to a lack of information that people have. And that's why I always advocate and encourage people to research and read books. And I've even recommended some books for people to read on the basics of historical comparative linguistics and more detailed into these issues that we discuss. And my hope has always been for people to, when we've had 10 years been discussing this, I would think that people would by now pick up some of the basic books to learn about historical comparative linguistics. So hopefully this show will help out with that. So sorry, I see you're back.
I'm hoping this ain't one of the typical situations again, because I'm on my laptop and not my phone. So
Okay.
so I don't know what's going on. So we'll just start from the beginning. Um, Let me know if you can
All right.
see.
Yep, you are on the big screen.
Alrighty. Alrighty. So your first question was, what is linguistics? And what was the second question?
Yeah, what is linguistics, and are all linguists made alike, basically?
Okay, okay. This one I'm gonna jump from two presentations, right? So actually, because it should be on the other one as well. So I'll just start there. This is a different presentation, but so because we had this before, right? So, oops, sorry, from 2022. So the question is, what is linguistics, and are all linguists made alike? And
Mm-hmm.
linguistics, as normally defined, is the scientific study of language, which gives us a better understanding of the nature of human language and contributes to our understanding of the human mind. And so, linguists are scientists who study the general properties of grammars, the universal properties found in all, and the specific properties of the grammars of individual languages. So, linguistics is the scientific study. In my personal opinion, some of it is science, some of it is not. So, when I define it, I usually say it is systematic. The systematic study of language, and
Mm-hmm.
and y'all excuse because I'm near the street, so the street is really loud when it goes by. So and then of course linguists are the scientists who study the general properties of linguistics and the like. So these are the normal branches of linguistics. So you have sociolinguistics, applied linguistics, computational linguistics, computer linguistics, historical linguistics. See, what people don't understand is there's historical linguistics as a field, and then comparative linguistics as a field. And then there's the combination of the two, which we call historical comparative linguistics, right? Then you have stylistics and psycholinguistics, right? And so with this slide here, you can, uh, and I don't know if it really comes across clean because of the size of the original image, but it asks the question again, what is linguistics? And of course, the scientific study of language. And so it's broken up into three main categories. So we're talking about the structure, the meaning, and the context. So when you're studying the structure of language, you're studying things like the grammar, the syntax, phonology, and morphology. So when you're dealing with phonology, it's the study of sounds, morphology is the study of word formation, and syntax is the study of sentence formation. Then there's the pragmatics aspect of it. So it's the study of meaning and context. So now you're studying semantics, where there's lexical or phrasal semantics. And then there's context. For example, pragmatics, the study of the meaning and context again, but this time context, for example, historical linguistics, which is the study of language change over time. So you can be studying just a single language or a group of languages and studying how they evolved over time. Psycholinguistics, the study of language in the mind, and then sociolinguistics, the study of language and social structure, right? And so here is, a more cleaned up variant of that kind of boarding. And so there's theoretical linguistics. There's, talking about phonology, morphology, syntax, structure and grammar, semantics, historical linguistics. And it has to be put in the context of theoretical versus like applied linguistics, which is on the far right there. So, you know, you start getting into the theories of phonology and sound change and the like, and certain things that you can. So this is the aspect of it that I don't think is science in the same sense, unless you're talking about phonology, because we have the tools and stuff to study sound in a very scientific way, but certain things are it still requires a human um, touch in essence, and so it's kind of it teeters on science and art. And then there's the interdisciplinary linguistics, of course, your psycholinguistics, sociolinguistics, pragmatics, discourse analysis, and where I fall in terms of computational and corpus linguistics. And then there's another aspect that interchanges in, of course, in applied linguistics. So, like for people who study linguistics in order to teach languages, right? Like in foreign languages, education, or for example, like my son has autism, and when he was young, he would not speak. So there's a group of linguists who concentrate on trying to get people who are on the spectrum to vocalize, and then those who have like kind of brain or psychological damage to still try to communicate and the like. So when people study linguistics from that front, that's all in the applied linguistics, as well as translation, and so that's in essence kind of what, even though he may not think of himself as a linguist, because he deals with the translating more specifically of ancient Egyptian texts into English. This is where the Sanjeti and would fall into the applied linguistics spectrum, right? And then there's the lexicography when you're dealing with creating dictionaries and the like, right? So hopefully all of this kind of makes fields. And then there's subfields of applied linguistics. So there's first language, second language, foreign language education, clinical linguistics, language testing, workplace communication. So there's people who will study linguistics just to have analyses and the like to improve the workspace. And they also use this in terms of marketing and the like. So, people who study language and linguistics can be marketers as well. Forensic linguistics, when they're trying to figure out, for example, if a certain person wrote a terrorist letter, right? They comb through all your social media texts, your text messages to your girl or whatnot, any kind of written material you've written, and they look for essentially the spirit, those little nuances that only you provide within a particular text that lets everybody know that this is you. And so, of course, the handwriting aspect is also a part of that conversation, and the what else? Yeah, because they use this a lot in court as well. So, and then there's the language information and effect, literary stylistics, critical discourse analysis,
I think we lost your volume. Okay,
testing.
yeah, here we go. Yep.
Can you
Yep.
hear me?
Hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So I hope I answered at least the first part. And so, of course, if there's these many branches of linguistics in terms of theory, you have theoretical and then you have applied linguists. So, just because you study linguistics or some aspect of linguistics doesn't necessarily make you proficient in other areas of studies of linguistics. So just because you can read from a dictionary doesn't mean you know how to put a dictionary together and all that's involved with it. But just because you translate text doesn't mean you know the science on how to program a computer to translate text and what's all involved with that. Like, that's a different branch, right? So there's all these different considerations, and so we always have to be careful when somebody says that they are a linguist, and so you got to ask them, well, what kind, right? And in what context do you use and apply your information in linguistics? So I hope I answered that question.
Yep. Yes, indeed. And I just want to remind everyone in the chat, once again, I want to appreciate everyone for tuning in. So thank everyone for tuning in. And I am looking at the chat, but now I want to get my questions out the way. But after I finish with my questions, picking Asar's brain about these issues, we will open it up for questions from the chat. Have a brief time, as long as time permits. We'll address some questions from the chat. So I just want to remind everyone of that. So make sure you don't forget your questions. Maybe write them down. All right. So I'm gonna get through some of my questions that I have here. So sorry, that was good. So now being that our title, let me just show this again real quick. Our title is To Greenberg or Not to Greenberg. Is it even a question? Now, for 10 years we've been having these discussions. So people who are familiar with these discussions, they are pretty well aware of who Greenberg is. But could you just give us a brief backdrop of Joseph Greenberg and why does his name come up? Why do we even bring his name up when these conversations occur? Who is Joseph Greenberg in the mix of all of this?
No problem. Let me know when if you can see my screen and when it pops
Yes,
up.
it's on. Mm,
Alrighty.
it's on.
Is it on? Oh, no wonder. I don't have it on play. Uh, I'm trying to look at my phone to make sure that it shows up on the
Oh
screen there.
yeah,
But anyway,
everyone see it.
uh, so Dr. Joseph Greenberg, who passed away some time ago, is an anthropologist who was interested in trying to solve the questions of the relatedness of African languages. Because at the time when he first started, like in the 50s and 60s, Africa's languages have not been um, adequately categorized, to say the least. And so they were still trying to um, group African languages together based upon race in many parts of the scholarship and the like. And this is where you have that uh, Hamitic theory, very prevalent in this time in the literature, which was these dark white Caucasians who came into Africa and gave Africa civilization and language. And so they even created a language group called Hamido-Semitic, right? And they included ancient Egyptian and the Ethiopian languages as Hamido-Semitic. Then in comes Greenberg, who through some analysis ultimately ends up with 4 language phyla. And we'll get into phyla in a moment. And what you see on the screen here on the left-hand side is kind of a rough map of the classification schema initiated by Joseph Greenberg. And so in the blue at the top is Afroasiatic, the yellow is Nilo-Saharan, the red and orange is Niger Congo. But in modern times, it's Bantu. They've kind of replaced Congo B, right? Because there's a debate on whether there is even a Bantu language family, because there's no linguistic justification to separate Bantu from the other so-called Niger Congo languages. So as a temporary compromise, now you'll see in the literature Niger Congo A and Niger Congo B. So that's what you see on this map right here. And then lastly is Khoisan, which you see in the green. And that purple that you see there is called Austronesian, because, you know, you have people from Asia who came and settled there. And I don't know why it's all purple, because you have Bantu speakers that stay there as well. Matter of fact, my maternal ancestry comes from this region here, and in between Madagascar and Mozambique, which is like right here, right? So, you know, we'll let Greenberg himself tell you who he is, right? So beforehand was a younger picture of him, but this is an older picture of him. And he wrote an article in 1986 titled "On Being a Linguistic Anthropologist." And in that text, he discusses his education in linguistics and why for him not getting a degree in linguistics is an advantage because he was not forced to accept dogma. And for a lot of linguists, this is actually at the root of his downfall, right? But we'll get into that a little later. So in the text, on page 6 of this article that I just mentioned here, he states the following. And remember, this is Greenberg himself. Nobody's writing about Greenberg. Greenberg himself wrote this article. So he says, from the foregoing account, it should also be clear that I did not have any coherent training in linguistics. I became an anthropologist by training. I mean, as he went and got his degrees all the way to the PhD in anthropology. But to a large extent, I made myself into a linguist, which means he was self-taught. Paradoxical as it may seem, the organized program in linguistics turned out, I believe, to be an intellectual advantage. It meant that I had no fixed emotional or intellectual commitment to the structuralist approach, which dominated American linguistics during the earlier part of my career. At Columbia, from the first, I gave courses in such topics as language and culture and linguistic field methods. So he taught him, so he got a PhD in anthropology, but he made himself a linguist and was able to teach linguistic courses at the college level. And I don't think you would be able to get away with that today. But you know, this was in the early days of university life, so there was a lot more leeway. And that's how Dr. Ben got into some of them schools. But that's another conversation for another day. So he continues. At Stanford, I participated actively in linguistic activities. When I arrived, it was only a program without an undergraduate major. And so for those, you know, not familiar with academia, there's when you come into a university or a college, they either have classes within a program or a department, like a whole department is set up. So if there is a program, usually you can take just courses. It can be an elective, or you can minor in that particular field of subject if there's at least a program. But if there's in the department, then they grant degrees in that particular subject. So that's what he's saying here. So when I arrived, it was only a program, not a well, he'll state it. So let me read. When I arrived, it was only a program without an undergraduate major, but it has since developed into a full-fledged department with an undergraduate program. From the beginning, I was a member of the program and later a member of both anthropology and linguistic departments until my recent retirement. I owe an enormous debt of intellectual gratitude to my colleagues in linguistics. In spite of this, so you see how he words that. I owe an enormous debt of intellectual gratitude to my colleagues in linguistics, right? So he's separating himself. In spite of this, I have always felt that I was an anthropologist whose specialty was linguistics rather than a linguist who just happened to be an anthropologist. So this is Greenberg and who he is according to his own words.
Okay. So that's a bit a nice summary of Greenberg. And so, and his name comes up a lot, you know, Joseph Greenberg, and his name is you know, married to African language, quote unquote, families. And so maybe we can dive into that. So his name is attached to the African Language Phyla, and some people say African language families. And so there's a big confusion between that phyla, phylum, and families. So the next question is, what if there's a difference, what is the difference between a language phyla, a language phylum, and then a language family or families? Is there a difference, and if so, what is the difference between those?
Yes, there is a difference. And I'm just going to, initiate this conversation or this part of the conversation, citing from the great linguist Hans Henrik Hock, who wrote the text. So anybody who takes historical comparative linguistic courses has to get this book. It was assigned to me. Everybody has it, right? So this is kind of the principles which kind of govern historical linguistics. So on page 564, he's talking about phylums, right? I have the physical book in my hand right here. So the actual title is section 18.5, phyla and isolates, degrees of relatability, right? And it says, for many language groups, the comparative method cannot go beyond establishing shared aberrancy. So when we're doing comparative work, one probative uh, test that we can do is to see if a language has, or some languages that we are comparing, if they both share what we call shared aberrancy. And so it would be real difficult to argue against a genetic classification for a language that is obeying the sound laws, and they have, for example, like a series that has good, better, best, right? Like if language B and language C has those cognates for those three words, that aberrancy. Because normally when, depending on the structure of the language, they should all share like some kind of inflection that gives the expanded nuances. But, you know, in this sense, you have good, better, best. These are different words altogether, but they belong in a series. So if I find that in English, and then we find the cognates in German, and then we find the cognates in Dutch, right? Then we can say that these are definitely related languages because they share this particular feature. So that's what they're saying here. So for many language groups, the comparative method cannot go beyond establishing shared aberrancy. A useful term for a group of this sort is phylum. As an example, consider the case of Uralic, which is a language family which includes Finno-Ugritic and Dravidian. It is possible to establish a considerable amount of systematically recurring correspondences, technical, basic, etc. vocabulary with no apparent lexical restrictions. So what you got to understand is, notice the words that they're using here. Uralic already is a language family. Dravidian is a language family. So what you're now doing is you're going a step higher, you're going further back in the history, and you're trying to compare two language families. So you're comparing the reconstructions and the individual languages of those families to see if there's any kind of evidence to justify those two language families being different branches of a larger language group. And so that larger language group is what we call a phylum. It's just the plural of phylum, right? So I hope that
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. So the an example that they give here in Proto-Uralic and Proto-Dravidian is showing these particular reconstructions that in the meanings here. I don't know if it really comes across here in this way. The image is not that great, but if y'all
We can
have the
see it
book,
good.
or alrighty,
We can see it. Mm-hmm.
you. I'm sorry.
I said we can see it. It's there.
Oh, okay, no, I'll just more so in terms of the quality
Okay.
versus so without going into detail, there appears to be a series of correspondences here. So you notice, for example, in the first consonant position for these words for give, feel, and river, you see the T phoneme, right? And then the same thing in the first consonant position for K here. And then in the second consonant position, you see K here, right? Like these are good things, but see the say here is missing from the Proto-Dravidian. So it's possible, and they discuss this more, but this is just to give you an example. So it's possible that Proto-Uralic and Proto-Dravidian are again two branches of a larger language group that we're calling a phylum. So that's what this is. So now when you go back to Joseph Greenberg, these are phylums or phyla, not families. So Afroasiatic consists of different language families. So the Cushitic family, Semitic family, Ancient Egyptian as its own family, Berber as its own family. So these are different families that are grouped together, and they call that grouping Afroasiatic. And there's a group of Nilotic languages that they group together and they call Nilo-Saharan, et cetera, et cetera. So just like Bantu is supposed to be a language family, it exists within a larger phyla called Niger Congo. So that's what he's bringing to the table in terms of this concept called a phylum, and so the as and in my 2020 text, I cite some more examples in terms of scholars who are talking about the dates of the usage of the comparative method. So let's just say, for example, that the comparative method only works up to 5,000 years. And then after that, it begins to break down. So that's what a lot of linguists believe. So um, let me see. So that's what a lot of linguists believe. But so do you give up, or do you continue to find evidence for even greater groupings? And so that's where Greenberg comes in. He's trying to go beyond the believed limits of the historical comparative method. And so these language phyla right here. So I hope that makes sense.
Okay. It definitely makes sense to me. Hopefully, everybody is still walking with us. Again, like I said, I want everybody to whip out their pens and pads, take down these notes, take some screenshots, and if you have questions, hopefully we'll have some time. We're gonna open up the chat and the panel. Okay, so now having cleared up the difference between a phyla and phylum, and just to kind of repeat, a phyla is the plural for phylum, and then a language family is at a lower, more detailed level than a phylum, in the way that you explained it.
Yeah,
So,
it would be equivalent to like, okay, um, if I'm married, right? So let's just say I snatched up Sister Mika, and me and Sister Mika got married in a chat, and we had 3 children, right? So we would be considered a nuclear family, and to an extent, we can include our parents, and depending on the age of the children, if they have children, that. So that would be one group, that would be one family.
Right.
But that fist within a village, and that village may exist within a city, and that city may exist within a state, and that state may exist within a country, or they may be one and the same, right? But the family is the smallest grouping unit, and then a phylum, or a phylum will be equivalent to um, like a village or a state,
Okay.
right? It's just a higher grouping that groups a bunch of families in terms of like a village or a state, if we wanted to make it that big.
Okay. So now I want to just back up a little bit before we move forward. But I hope everybody got that clarity on phyla, phylum, and language families. But I want to back up just a little bit to Greenberg. So by way of Greenberg's own words, he basically was an anthropologist, and he received his training in anthropology, but he made himself into a linguist. Now, in these 10-year or so conversations that we've been having about these issues, they mainly have come up because of your introduction to the community with Jean-Claude Mboli. All right. And so nobody's heard of him until, basically you've kind of introduced everyone to Jean-Claude Mboli and his work, his 2010 work. And so along with that introduction, and with everyone being so used to Greenberg and the four African language phyla, and Mboli's work seeming to be radically different, some of the claims and charges that have been made is that Mboli is not a linguist. So therefore, because Mboli is not a linguist, then we can just sweepingly disregard his work and stick with Greenberg. So that raises a question I want to ask you about going back to Greenberg and what makes a linguist a linguist. So with Greenberg and Mboli, and I know we've also talked about Dr. Theophilo Benga, Dr. Shekanta Diop, who else? Dr. Christopher Gerrit, and many others out there that people may or may not be familiar with. So by Greenberg not being formally trained in linguistics, but people have definitely accepted him as a linguist, how does that compare to a person like Mboli and Christopher Gerrit, for example? Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Well, there's two main issues here. One is politics, and the other is race. Right? Remember, Greenberg is a Jewish individual, so and especially around this time after World Wars One and Two, they've been able to gain some political clout in all areas and spheres of life. So certain entries into places was open to them in a way that was not open to, of course, black folks who were going through apartheid here in the United States, right? So that's one thing. And then, of course, there's the politics, right? So a linguist, of course, is any person who studies the language scientifically, who studies the general properties of grammars, the universal properties found in all languages, special properties, et cetera, et cetera. So, a linguist is somebody who does linguistics, right? Now, whether you're good or bad has no bearing on whether you have a degree or not, right? But I think that conversation I have in this text here, right? So, because I always gotta bring this up to folks when we have these discussions, because the first thing that they'll say is that I don't have a degree in linguistics. And then I'll be like, well, neither did Cheikh Anta Diop, neither did Theophilo Benga, right? And they'll try to argue me down. And I keep trying to tell folks that no, Theophilo Benga has degrees in philosophy. Like, I think his undergrad degree was like in some kind of like government training or something to this nature. But he got a master's in philosophy, another master's in education, and another master's in history. But his PhD was also in history. And people see this comes directly from the old website from San Francisco State University. And people think that, you know, because they read what they want to read. So when you go to the site, it's going to say advanced studies in history, linguistics, and Egyptology. It doesn't say advanced degrees per se. Like, everybody think that Dr. Theophilo Benga has degrees in linguistics and Egyptology and prehistory and philology and all this. Like, no, he did extra studies. He did what Greenberg did. He made himself into a linguist, right? And there's an article that you can find. Hopefully, you can still find it online. Titled "Past." It's a long ass title too. Past Afrocentricity: Reassessing Cheikh Anta Diop's place in the Afrocentric frame. African writers. Sorry for the loudness. Again, it's a main street. African writers have been marginalized and grouped as Afrocentrists, but for all Afrocentrism rage against the dogmatism of the last 500 years of European hegemony, it is itself dogmatic. I don't know why all of this is in here. I think that really this is the main title: Past Afrocentricity, Reassessing Cheikh Anta Diop's place in the Afrocentric frame. So I think this is probably just a quote from the article. Either way it goes, it's long, right? And so it's by Lafayette Gaston, and so it's an interview. There's an interview here with Dr. Theophilo Benga, and so there's a in the section of it is he's speaking about the Dakar school, who is what we say is a Diopian school. The people who followed the lead of Cheikh Anta Diop and expanded his work. So, of course, Dr. Theophilo Benga was a protege and colleague of the late Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop. And so the article states the foremost of Diop's students is his protege, Theophilo Benga, Obenga. It says Mbochi here, but that's an ethnic group and also a language. So he's Obenga's of the Mbochi people, and Mbochi is the Bantu language that is native to Obenga. First learned about Diop's work in the 1960s, meeting him through friends while studying at the University of Bordeaux in France. The two eventually became close, sharing ideas and traveling together, Diop having witnessed the ideological dogmatism of the academy in his attempt to obtain his PhD. Advised Obenga to concentrate on a topic. Thus, after having studied at the University of Geneva, Obenga studied both Egyptology and linguistics while at the Sorbonne, receiving his PhD in history. So he took classes in Egyptology, intro classes, and did self-study after that and expanded on it. But his PhD dissertation is in history, and his dissertation was on the Kingdom of Congo, right? So he does not have a PhD in linguistics. He does not have a master's in linguistics, right? And the note here says 35, and when you go to 35, there's a text here: Christopher Gray, Conceptions of History and the Works of Cheikh Anta Diop and Theophilo Benga, as well as Theophilo Benga personal communication. So he spoke with Obenga himself, and this is what he told him. So he's telling what it's saying right here is Diop, because if y'all know, I think Diop was denied his PhD twice, and he got it on the third time. And so to help Obenga to avoid all of that, he said, do something that is less threatening, right? Just get the degree and do the work you want to do later. So Obinga got his degree in history. And this is going to be important, right? Because people want to dismiss Obinga. And Cheikh Anta Diop got a BA in philosophy, a master's in chemistry, 2 masters in chemistry to be exact, and his PhD, I believe, is actually in anthropology, right? So Dr. Christopher Gerrit, because all his degrees are in history, but like Greenberg, like Obinga, who studied linguistics on his own, took formal courses and then other uninformal courses. But he uses linguistics in the greater context of history. And I have taken courses while I was in undergrad under professors who got their PhDs in history under not Greenberg, under Gerrit, right? And so I know his methods, I know the school, I know that very intimately, and still in contact with a number of these, been presented at conferences with them, right? And here's another one, Dr. Roger Blanch, who, just like Greenberg, has his degrees in anthropology, but he is known in terms of linguistics. So the question is, why do a lot of us in our community accept Roger Blanch, Christopher Gerrit, but reject Cheikh Anta Diop, Theophile Obenga, and Jean-Claude Mboli, whose degrees is in electrical engineering? So more so the hard sciences, right? And you notice that there's a fundamental difference between these folks. Talking about Jean-Claude Mboli, Obenga, Diop, and then Greenberg, Gerrit, and Roger Blanch. Can you guess what's the difference between those? Just take a wild guess.
A wild guess. Could it be the way they look?
Because we have Negropeans who accept any and everything white folks do and say, but if black folks do it and say it, then there's a problem. And we see this in this conversation. This is why we have to continue to have these conversations, because what I'm about to bring out later on in the conversation is stuff that European linguists are saying about Greenberg and his methods. But when we say them, then there's a problem. We don't know what the hell we're talking about. We don't know what the consensus is. People using scientific jargon and don't even know what it means.
Okay.
But I hope I answered that part of the question.
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of get some clarity, allow you to clarify the side-by-side comparison between Greenberg, Blanch, Gerrit, Mboli, Obenga, Diop, and even yourself. So out of all the people that I just mentioned, none of those people that I just mentioned have a formal PhD in linguistics, but yet they are seen as linguists, especially when it comes to Greenberg. Greenberg is seen so much so as a linguist that he is the default setting in everybody's mind when it comes to the so-called African Language Phyla, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of begs the question too, is that, how is it that a non-PhD linguist can have such an impact on the minds of everybody to use his proposals, his work, and stick with it? So that's not a real question, but I'm saying that kind of begs that question, especially if the criteria to take your work serious or any work serious is that you have to have a PhD in linguistics. So that's very interesting, and I know that conversation has come up a lot. I know that has been levied at you when when I've seen you people get into arguments. They say, "Well, Asar Imhotep, you don't have a degree. Are you peer reviewed? Do you have any journal articles? Do you have a degree? And so on and so forth." That seems to be a popular thing to say. Okay, so I wanted to back up there to kind of establish that, but now to kind of come back to, I guess, the language phyla and family situation. Because remember, my original question was, Greenberg is known for our idea of the four African language phyla. Now, now in linguistics, there are words like genetic relationships, morphology, the very word family, because you broke down the difference. So we got family, we got the word genetics, we got the word morphology being discussed with languages, but they're not physical things. So could you quickly give a breakdown of how those words are used and why those words are used when it comes to language, when it seems like those words have been used historically in other fields, mainly biology. So what can you tell us about that?
Okay. Well, I want to first, I'm gonna answer your question, but I want to frame it and have this as part of the understanding. So what I want what is about to be stated to be impressed on your mind throughout this entire conversation from this point forward, right? So remember that a family is a group of closely related languages. A phyla is a group of families,
So can you see my
right?
screen? Can you see the screen I'm sharing?
Yeah. Well, no,
Okay,
I
does that
can.
act?
I can see it on my phone. So because I'm full screen on my laptop. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was gonna say, does this accurately reflect what you said earlier? Because it's just a diagram of phylum at the top, and then three families beneath it, and then each family can be broken down to individual languages within the family.
Exactly. And
Okay, so go ahead,
then
because this
dialects from there, and then
yeah. So I'm just
idiolects from there.
okay. So go ahead, continue. I'm just showing us why you say what you're saying now. Then I'll show yours again.
Alrighty. So yeah. So the as you can see, the phylum is the greater grouping of smaller language families, which the language families consist of individual languages, right? And so the idea is that if one language belongs in one phyla, it can't be related to another language in another phyla. And this is exactly essentially what Greenberg says here in his 1963 work on African languages. So he says, as for Meinhoff's proof of the Hamitic theory that I mentioned earlier, as for Meinhoff's proof of the Hamitic relationship of Fulani in De Sprachen der Hamiten, I discuss it only briefly here because the establishment of the membership of Fulani in the Niger Congo family excludes the possibility of its membership in the Hamitic group. That Hamitic and Niger Congo, however, may ultimately be related is, of course, possible. And there are a few indications that this is so, but this does not, of course, imply a special position for Fulani as against the hundreds of other Niger Congo languages. So there's a lot to unpack here, right? So prior to Greenberg's classification of the
four major phyla. Linguists were grouping the Fulanis with the Hamitic languages because it was racial. Because the Fulanis in general look a little different than folks in West Africa. So they're like, well, they can't belong to those group of people. They must belong to the Hamitic group. And they're really white folks from the Caucasus who darkened up when they came into Africa. That was the argument back in the day. So Greenberg said, wait a minute, when I'm looking at the language is related to Wolof and Seir and Bambara, etc. So we're taking Fulani and we're grouping it in Niger Congo. And so he's saying here that when we group Fulani into Niger Congo, it excludes the possibility of membership in Hamitic, which is now Afroasiatic. So because of this thinking, anytime somebody, for example, like when Diop is saying, well, wait a minute, the ancient Egyptian language is put in the so-called Hamido-Semitic group. But I'm finding all these regular non-accidental correspondences between my native language, Wolof, which is classified here as Niger Congo. And Obinga is saying the same thing with his native language of Mbochi, which is a Bantu language. And Mboli is saying the same thing with Zande and Sango, these languages. And Mubabinge Bololo is saying the same thing with Chiluba. And Modupe Oduyoye is saying the same thing with Yoruba language. Right? And so, you know, in science, when you have a theory and there's a bunch of evidence to falsify that theory, you have to redo and reconceptualize everything. But because of politics, they don't want to do this, right? And so, so this is where this is at the core of these debates, because Greenberg, without doing any kind of historical comparative method, prescribed the relationship between African languages. And this was the error. And so when the Africans start doing linguistics and they start learning how to do linguistics the way that the rest of the world does linguistics, using the historical comparative method, they came to find this statement here false. And so this is at the core of the issues here. So now we start getting into these linguistic concepts, right? So we go into this I believe this is the first edition of this text of the Bantu languages, edited by Derek Nurse and Gerard Phillipson, right? Bantu or not, because canonical systems are so typical of Bantu languages, their presence has been used sometimes as a litmus test for membership of the Bantu family. This is unfortunate, since having a gender system of any kind is a typological feature that can be acquired or lost. It is not a trait that proves genetic relationships. So a language like Como that has lost all noun classes is no less Bantu than languages such as Sotho or Lingala with a canonical noun system. So we're throwing these terms, and we'll get a better understanding of what this stuff means in a little bit. So we're talking about genetic relation. I'm sorry.
No, so let me just pause you real quick, because you about to unload. So let me just frame up this question then. No, this is good though. This is good. And somebody in the chat suggested that we change the title to Asar in the hot seat. So let me just frame this question differently then. because I had asked about the terminology, right? The word morphology, the word family and genetic relationships. So what is the difference? Because you went back to Greenberg. So
Uh-huh.
if not if, but since Greenberg did not prescribe this or write out his prescription, aka his proposals, and the African Language Phyla by using the historical comparative method, then what is the difference between what he did use or how he was able to group them, or what was that grouping based on, versus what you're talking about now in terms of what these African scholars that you mentioned, what they're using to find out these relationships? You know, it looked like you were about to go into it, but I wanted to kind of frame it up that way in terms of Greenberg's method, which today most people default and accept, and this is what everybody repeats and parrots, versus what the African scholars, because you know, as you went through before, all these esteemed men that names we were mentioning, none of them have formal degrees or PhD in linguistics, but for some reason Greenberg and the likes, their work is by default accepted. But then when African scholars apply the scientific method, historical comparative method, they're finding having different outcomes. So what's the difference, if you can break that down?
Okay, well, let me start off with some base concepts first, and then we'll build to that.
All
Right.
right.
So when linguistics often borrows terms from biology, and so we're familiar with the concept of genetic. Mention me and Sister Mika getting married, and then we have 3 children. So those 3 children are the genetic descendants of myself and Sister Mika in the chat, right? And those children, of course, can have children, et cetera, et cetera. There's a line of descent, you know, leading all the way back to Sister Mika and I, hypothetically, of course, in speaking here. So I'm citing from the text Historical Linguistics toward a 21st century reintegration by the late Don Renge and Joseph Eska, right? And so they let us know here that linguistic descent is speaking about a language or dialect Y of a given time is descended from X of an earlier time if and only if X developed into Y through an unbroken sequence of instances of native language acquisition. That's a fancy mathematical way of saying, you know, uh, Tyrone is my grandson if and only if he is the son of my daughter, who is the daughter of myself and Sister Mika, right? There's an unbroken chain in terms of that particular lineage, which we can do a DNA test and we can see all the markers and they'll tell us like, yep, that is definitely somebody who is directly in line in terms of family alignment. And so it's the same thing in linguistics, right? So we got to understand what this means, because this is what develops the families, right? Because a proto language diversifies into dialects, and the people that represent those dialects spread out over time, and those dialects become harder to understand to the point that they're not understandable by the speakers. And then that's where linguists categorize them as their own individual languages. Well, even though they're their own individual languages, the pronunciations and things may change, but we can conduct tests that will let us know if they are in fact related to the proto language from which they evolved into, right? So So that's in essence what we're talking about when we're talking about a genetic relationship, a genetic family. So Greenberg is trying to establish quote unquote genetic relationships, but he's refusing to do a DNA test. What Greenberg is doing, instead of doing a blood test, instead of doing a genetic test, he instead is looking at the face. You remember on the Maury show, every time they would do those paternity tests, and it'd be the the woman bring the man on, and then he'd be like, "That ain't my baby. I ain't got
Right.
ears like that. They don't even look like me." Right? It's
Right.
just some
Right. Right.
surface. They clearly don't understand how genetics work, but they're saying because they don't look like me, that's not my baby. And then of course they do in the test, you are the father.
Right.
Or you are not the father. Then of course the cameraman runs a chase after the woman who runs all in the back. And we have a funky good time on the opposite end of the TV. But in real life, this is exactly what's happening. So this is, metaphorically speaking here, this is the difference between using the historical comparative method, which is the DNA test, versus typology, which is the lookership. That's not my baby. I ain't got no hair like that. That baby lighter than me.
Mm-hmm.
And this is essentially what it is, right? So, but we also got to keep this thing in mind as well, because you have to have full disclosure and got to understand how the historical comparative method is used in determining relationships and what it can and cannot say. So Hans Hawk, again in Principles of Historical Linguistics, states that strictly speaking, the term unrelated is not very felicitous or felicitous. I cannot say that word for nothing. The word unrelatable would give a much more accurate description, for we can never prove that two given languages are not related. It is always conceivable that they are in fact related, but that the relationship is of such an ancient date that millennia divergent linguistic changes have completely obscured the original relationship. So that's why. So now we got to go back to what I was saying before. So the argument has been that the historical comparative method is only good really for languages that are closely related. But the further and further back in time we go, the method collapses. And so what we're saying is that you can't say that the languages are not related, but just that using this test, it's not conceivable that they are relatable in a close fashion, because they do not meet the threshold in terms of examples and regular sound meaning correspondences to say that they are in fact related languages, which is typically 18% of basic vocabulary, right? So that's what he's saying here. So when we're talking about the comparative method, we're talking about these steps here. And so we won't go into the details of how all of this sounds, but it goes in the process of assembling cognates, establishing sound correspondences, reconstruct the proto sound, determine the status of similar, partially overlapping correspondence sets, check the plausibility of the reconstructed sound from the perspective of the overall phonological inventory, because you're also reconstructing the entire phonology of of the related languages, reconstruct the sound from the perspective of linguistic universals, and then reconstruct individual morphemes. Right. So these are all the steps that are involved, and of course, they don't do that in that school, right? So another thing to keep in mind here is that the first step in applying the comparative method is formulating a hypothesis that the given languages to be compared are in fact descended from a common source. It obviously makes little sense to apply the comparative method to languages that evidently aren't related at any reasonable time depth. Kind of, echoing what Hawk said in the other text, right? And the failure of the procedure to reveal any regularity of correspondence would be a strong argument against a theory of genetic common origin. Thus, the comparative method, strictly speaking, is not a method for generating relationship hypotheses, but rather is a crucial terming or not confirming such hypotheses. And this is very important because there's another argument that has been levied, for example, of using reconstructions in an analysis to go further back into time regarding the language families in establishing relationships. And like people, you don't use the comparative method to create hypotheses. The hypotheses are ancient Egyptian and Wolof are related languages. Then you use the comparative method to either confirm that hypothesis or disconfirm that hypothesis. And if the hypothesis is confirmed, you'll be able to establish a relationship because you have actual facts. And the theory is just the synchronization of the facts. That's what a proto-reconstruction is. It's a theory, not a hypothesis. And so people be using that term wrong, right? So a plausible, and this is from Lyle Campbell and William J. Poser, Language Classification, History, and Method. A plausible demonstration of genetic relationship does not, in fact, depend precisely on similarities among the languages compared, because that's where we're getting into the typology, but rather on systematic correspondences among the sounds in compared words, especially basic vocabulary, and on pattern grammatical evidence of the appropriate sort. So we're starting is what is a genetic relationship? How do you establish the genetic relationship versus the typological relationship? Because the Greenberg method is mass comparison and is looking for lookalikes. So what does this text say here? A plausible demonstration of genetic relationship does not, in fact, depend precisely on similarities, because the words and phonemes may not look alike at all. So that's equivalent to the brother coming on Maury talking about that ain't my baby because the baby's too light-skinned. That baby don't look like me. Looks can be deceiving, especially at like 5 months old that they be having them babies on that damn show. But that's not, that's neither here nor there, right? So, what is this? Well, I put this here just to let everybody know that the comparative method is the method used to establish genetic relationships.
So real quick.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so the comparative method to your Maury Povich analogy, the comparative method would be the equivalent of what Maury Povich does when he pulls out that envelope, that genetic test.
It's the genetic test. So as from that same text, as it states here, in practice, the successful methods for establishing distant linguistic affinity have not been different from those used to validate any family relationship, whether close or distant. So just because you have a hypothesis about a phylum doesn't mean that it should not obey the rules of the historical comparative method. So the comparative method has always been the primary tool for establishing these genetic relationships. That's what you use. So you got to keep all of this in mind because I'm going to be citing some stuff here. So, and this is important because now we're going to get on some of the critiques of the Africanist school, right? So this is Jean Lance Deneux, who writes in this text, History of African Linguistics. When
Wait,
we
let me.
reread,
I need to pause you. I'm sorry. Just to interrupt you because whenever you say something, and again, this is 10 years of going back and forth with people. So when you say something that I think it needs to be underscored, I'm gonna interrupt you a second. So you just said Africanist. What? Because people may be confused because we say Jean-Claude Mboli is an African linguist. We say Obenga is an African linguist. So what's the difference between an African linguist versus an Africanist? If you could briefly just define that.
yeah, an Africanist is just a label given to linguists who study African languages, who belong essentially to the Greenberg school.
Okay, that's clear. So I just want
So
everybody to be
versus
clear on that.
like the car school, people who belong to the Diopian school of thought, right? These are just different schools of thoughts, and these are just labels. But that's what an Africanist is,
Okay,
but
just wanted to make
not
sure that's
necessarily
clear.
African linguist. All right. So
Got it.
so Deneux writes, when we reread the most striking works of the great Africanists from the beginning of the 20th century, we are struck by a really massive fact. It's that they almost never explain their theoretical support. They probably do not do applied linguistics in the sense that we hear this word today, but they are no more theorists and fundamentalists than one would find at the origin of a new scientific hypothesis. So he's saying, so remember, we're in the 21st century right now. So the 20th century was a time of Greenberg and the people before him and the people after him, Christopher Gerrit, Roger Blinch, and all of them other folks. Those are Africanists. And when other linguists around the world are studying African languages and linguistics, they're confused. They're like, what the hell is this? The Africanists just made up their own shit. And I'm sorry for my language. They made up their own stuff, right? And it isn't accepted. It's not the consent. People like to use the word consensus and be using it all wrong. But this is not the standard method for establishing genetic relationships in terms of the typological method and the mass comparison method, which we'll get into later, right? And so every single time it comes to proving their arguments, as this linguist has written, it's that they almost never explain their theoretical support. They just have a thought in their mind and they just go with it. And people think because they have a PhD in something that they must know what the hell they're talking about. Right? Another linguist, R.M.W. Dixon, in The Rise and Fall of Languages. He states, for many linguists, such views pertaining to Greenberg's method and his Eurasiatic, because he didn't stop at African languages, he tried to apply this to languages around the world. And those linguists essentially kicked him out of the academy for spreading pseudoscience. And here's one of those critiques. He said, for many linguists, such views, and he was talking about Greenberg's methods for Eurasiatic, the mass comparison method, the superphylum, fall more into the category of religious beliefs than scientifically testable hypotheses. About on a par with the claims that all languages had the same underlying deep structure and the position of the stars at the moment of our birth character. What is he saying? Astrology. So he's saying that Greenberg's method is equivalent to astrology. And these are the critiques of the people in the field, right? He says, there is no reputable historical linguist anywhere in the world who accepts the claims of Greenberg and the Nostradicus. Page 44. Right? But people think that when Obenga and Brother Asar and Mboli, based upon our own analysis and work, make these same arguments, we don't know what the hell we talking about. But everybody I'm citing has PhDs in linguistics. And they're white. I made sure that they were white because y'all don't accept nothing unless it comes from a white. So I made sure for all you online research Uncle Ruckuses that I only cite the white boys because y'all love white people. So this is white on white crime right now. This ain't got nothing. Black folks is in the back observing. This is white on white crime right now. Right? Which is interesting because you have another PhD in linguistics, D. Darby, talking about we will also have to wait for the very speakers of these languages who have become linguists to attack comparative linguistics in order to elucidate the relationships of multiple languages, neighboring and related or not. But because y'all have such internalized hatred towards yourself and Black folks and Africans, when the Africans actually learn how to do historical comparative linguistics and they come up with different results than the white boys, Gerrit, Blinch, Greenberg, etc., then y'all want to call them pseudo. But all the real white linguists is calling them pseudo, saying that this stuff is on par with astrology. So after this show, since we all like astrology now, after this show, we're going to do an after party on my channel, and I'm going to do a tarot reading for everybody in the chat room so we can ascertain what's going to go on for the rest of this year, so I can tell you what rituals you need to do to all become millionaires so we can free Black people.
After party.
Already. Right? So we have two other, well, this is the same dude. So this, on the right here, this is R.M.W. Dixon, and on the left is Alexandra Y. Achenwald. And so Dixon wrote this text here, but he co-wrote this text here, Aerial Diffusion and Genetic Inheritance, Problems in Comparative Linguistics, right? And they, at the beginning of the text, they're giving some ideas of still kind of attacking Greenberg's work a bit. So he says, discussing work on African languages, Dixon states, remember they're both writing the introduction, so they're speaking in third person. After reviewing the available literature, an outsider is forced to conclude that the idea of genetic relationship and the term language family, in quotes, are used in quite different ways by Africanists and by scholars working on language from other parts of the world. So he's saying here, again, just like what this linguist was saying, that Deneau here, when we read the most striking works of the great Africanists from the beginning of the 20th century, we are struck by a really massive fact. It's that they almost never explain their theoretical support. And then we have another linguist here saying, after reviewing the available literature, an outsider, it means linguist, PhD white linguist, outside of the Africanists, is forced to conclude that the idea of genetic relationship and the term language family are used in quite different ways by Africanists. Like they use it totally different. Like they're using our language, they're using our words, but it don't mean the same as the rest of the world of the white linguists use it, They just made up their own stuff in dealing with African languages, and by scholars working on languages from other parts of the world. Both Dimmendaal in chapter 13 and Heine Kuteva in chapter 14 present the received opinion that there are in Africa 4 major language families or genetically defined units: Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afroasiatic, and Khoisan. In fact, Khoisan is regarded by those scholars who have studied it in most detail as a linguistic area consisting of several distinct genetic families. Afroasiatic does appear to be one genetic unit, although full justification of this has yet to be published in integrated form. There are wide divergences of opinion on the status of Nilo-Saharan. For Niger-Congo, all we can say is that there has so far been no principled justification for this as a language family. This is interesting, especially since he was arguing, Greenberg that is, that Fulani belongs to Niger-Congo and is not a Hamitic language. But Dimmendaal, he's an Africanist. So he's not an outsider. He's white, though. He got a PhD in linguistics. He's white and a PhD in linguistics, and he's an Africanist. And he's telling you, so far, there's been no principled justification for this as a language family. So where the hell does Fulani fit? As Dimmendaal states in his section 3, by the criteria of regular sound correspondences among these languages and of the reconstruction of proto-forms, Niger-Congo is not a proven genetic unity. It may well be that, as Heine and Kuteva say, Greenberg's genetic classification of African languages is by now widely accepted, but being widely accepted, therefore amongst Africanists, does not equate with has been scientifically justified. And this is what the Negropeans don't understand. They don't understand the difference between something being widely accepted, an agreed upon, a vast agreed upon opinion, versus has been scientifically justified. And you have an Africanist here telling you, no, it has not been scientifically justified, because what did we read earlier? Let's go back, because always got to remind them. The comparative method has always been the primary tool for establishing these relationships. Talking about genetic relationships, right? A plausible demonstration of a genetic relationship does not in fact depend precisely on similarities among the languages compared, but rather on systematic correspondences among sounds in compared words, especially basic vocabulary and on pattern grammatical evidence, right? So we understand this. So let's go back to Dimmendaal. What did he say? Niger-Congo is not a proven genetic unity. Why? Because by the criteria of regular sound correspondences, it does not exist. And so Afroasiatic can't exist, Nilo-Saharan can't exist, and Khoisan can't exist. None of them are proven genetic units because none of them have been established using the comparative method. And this is the white PhD linguist telling you this, not the poor and unintelligent Black African scholars. That's how y'all see them in your mind. But the good old brilliant white scholars who smell like lemon, according to Uncle Ruckus. So let's continue. Let me see what. So at the end of section 1, we quoted Dench's methodological principle that only after all possible explanations for the shared features have been exhausted should they be taken to be a genetic inheritance. The opposite procedure appears to have been followed by Africanists.
He said the opposite.
So whatever the scientific method is that all the linguists, all the purely intelligent, brilliant white linguists with PhDs in linguistics use, the Africanists said, F that. We're going to do the exact opposite. And we're going to get all the internet brilliant podcasters to agree with us because we know that they don't like themselves in African scholars, and they're easily gullible, and they refuse to do actual research, and they believe that ChatGPT is a god. So I had to bring that back and throw that in there. I'm sorry. So at a first stage, every sort of resemblance was taken as indicative of genetic connection. Many of these are in fact typological or areal similarities. So again, this isn't me. Anybody can go get these texts. I even give you their faces to make sure that they white, because y'all don't trust me when I say that they white. So I got to show you pictures of them. Let you know that they white. Because y'all don't trust black folks. Handbook of Comparative and Historical Indo-European Linguistics. Right? In the study of African languages, historical linguistics played a most important role already before African linguistics became established as a discipline in its own right. An endless number of studies on language relationship and language classification have since been published, and several attempts were made at reconstructing the history of African language phyla and families. To the mid-20th century, however, by far the majority of such contributions were based on mixed criteria: economic, cultural, physical anthropology, and linguistic. But even if purely linguistic criteria were applied, no dividing line was drawn as a rule between genetic and typological criteria. This situation changed with the publication of a series of articles by Joseph Greenberg on African linguistic classification, a revised version of which appeared later on in a monograph entitled The Languages of Africa, 1963. In this famous book, the author provided a complete genetic classification, in quotes. You notice he put that in quotes, that distinguishes 4 genetic phyla, each containing a number of families and subfamilies. It is a taxonomy that in subsequent years was used most frequently by other scholars at a point of departure for new attempts at classifying African language groups. However, although Greenberg made exclusive use of genetic, notice he put it in quotes, linguistic criteria, in spite of the enormous impact of the investigation on follow-up studies, his classification was not, I repeat it, was not based on the comparative method, but on an approach Greenberg himself called mass comparison, and that other scholars refer to as the method of resemblances. So I gotta go back and read that this again. At the end of section 1, we quoted Dentsch's methodological principle that only after all possible explanations for the shared features have been exhausted should they be taken to be genetic inheritance. The opposite procedure appears to have been followed by Africanists, right? So a whole totally different text reaffirms the same thing. In spite of the enormous impact of his investigation and follow-up studies, his classification was not based on a comparative method, but on the exact opposite approach that Greenberg himself called mass comparison. For a harsh critique of this method, see Fedora 1982. In fact, systematic application of the comparative method has been relatively rare to this day in African linguistics, as will be shown in this section. So again, another text is telling you that the comparative method has rarely ever been used in African language studies, because the Africanists have essentially a monopoly in the academic sector on African languages. So they've been able to get away with stuff, and only in more recent times have other linguists from around the world been able to come back and study these texts. And now they're all confused, like, what the hell is this? When did y'all start making this stuff up? Right? So, I'll save these for later, just in case. Yeah, I'll save these for later because I wanna go into. Well, first of all, do you have another question before I start
If you can,
rambling?
if you can put back, unless you're looking for something, if you could put back that
Good.
the last slide you had that had the green highlighted.
This one.
Yeah, that one back up. because I think that this somewhat explains, because there's a confusion, right, where where people are like, well, if Greenberg's method and the outcome of his method is so quote unquote bad or incorrect or whatever the case is, then why is it still used so prevalent out there? You know, when you looking at ChatGPT, for example, Wikipedia, or whatever the case is, why is it still used so much? And I think that this somewhat addresses it, where it's in green, right there. But that would be a question, because as you pointed out, or even demonstrated by these other scholars, the fact that there's a difference between a bona fide genetic relationship between languages versus what Africanists do and what they have proposed, which is the opposite, as you said, the opposite method and everything. That being the case, because there's a big difference, then why is the other one still used and quoted so much?
Who knows? Again, because these departments and programs were established in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s, by the time that the world was able to catch up and review these texts, it was already going. So it had already received kind of a level of establishment. And you know, they fiercely try to defend, but every single time, you know, as a matter of fact, I'll just so here's a recent text. This was published in 2023. Ancient Egyptian and Afroasiatic, Rethinking the Origins. And it's an edited text from presenters who had two conferences way back in 2015 and 2016 under the same title for which the book is named, right? And so they're asking the question, what is the role of ancient Egyptian in Afroasiatic? Is it an Afroasiatic language or is it not? Is it related to Semitic or is it not? So you have this professor here. So he's another white. I made sure I show the picture because, you know, they won't believe you if you say that, you know, Aaron M. Wilson Wright is not white. Matter of fact, his part of his last name rhymes with white. Right?
No deny.
So he has an article in the text, Rethinking the Relationship Between Egyptian and Semitic, the morphological, lexical, and phonological evidence. Right? So this is his chapter conclusion. Darn it. That's not what I want. Hold on. Let me. I want to get to this, but that's not the important part. So I need to find. Let me do this real quick. I gotta find my other slideshow.
Yeah, keep finding. While you find it, I'm just gonna engage the chat for a second. So, again, I appreciate everybody tuned in, and for those who may have tuned in late, the title of our discussion, the overall title of our discussion, is "To Greenberg or Not to Greenberg? Is it even a question?" And by the time we finish, you're gonna realize why we put that last part in the title. The title's gonna make sense. Is it even a question? And so we're going through different questions and answers with demonstrations on clarifying the issues with the African Language Phyla, Joseph Greenberg, why his name keeps popping up, and so on and so forth. This is, it's been over 10 years worth of conversations, arguments, fussing and fighting about these issues. So hopefully, you know, us doing it this way offers a little clarification. And by the way, when this is done and it's archived, Sister Emiket is going to timestamp all of these different sections, break down this video into timestamps based on the questions that I'm asking. So that way you all can come back to this video and go straight to the timestamp if you need to re-listen to it, or even suggest other people to listen to it, because, you know, at a certain point, you got to say enough is enough. You know, going back and forth with people, arguing over the same stuff, repeating the same stuff for 10 years. So hopefully we'll be able to timestamp this and link other videos over the 10 years and create a package. So this, this is going to become the linguistic package for the Negropeans and the Uncle Ruckus out there on the YouTube streets and the and the conflict community. All right, so I don't know. Did you find it yet, Asar?
Yeah, I found it.
Okay, all right. So you can go ahead.
Okay. So what I was there's a first part. I'm sorry. So, you know, I named the text. I mentioned the author, which is him. So at the beginning of the chapter of the text talking about Proto-Semitic and Egyptian, the author, him right here, Mr. Wright, that rhymes with white, right? He's giving his background, and he's gonna reveal something in the background that is very telling. So he says, I studied Middle Egyptian for several years in graduate school, and I've been taught it a few times in graduate seminars. I even taught it a few times in graduate seminars. But obviously, I'm far from being an expert in Egyptian grammar. Quite early in my teaching career, I also studied some Berber and Cushitic, hoping to gain a better understanding of early Semitic through a better understanding of its genetic siblings. But I ultimately grew frustrated in that enterprise. The dearth of clear cognate sets made it difficult to apply the comparative method, either to reconstruct much of the earlier ancestral Afroasiatic with any confidence, or to sort out the interrelationships of its alleged descendant branches. So what he's saying here is, when I tried to apply the comparative method, I couldn't go far because there was no series of regular sound meaning correspondences. And no approach other than the standard comparative method can achieve reliable results toward those goals. So y'all are hearing that there's certain themes that keep coming up in all of these different texts, right? These are different white men, white linguists, saying the same thing, right? He says, my frustration in working on Afroasiatic was brought into sharp focus one semester 25 or 30 years ago, when my late Harvard colleague, Calvert Watkins, the eminent Indo-Europeanist, and Indo-Europeanist is Indo-European languages, so he's a PhD in Indo-European linguistics, asked me to present the status questionis of, or basically the status quo on Afroasiatic, to his graduate seminar on historical linguistics. At the end of my 2 or 3 hour presentation, Watkins, that's the Harvard Indo-Europeanist, his first comment was something like, so Afroasiatic, not really an established family then. So that was his quote. And so now Wright is speaking again. He says, and so Afroasiatic was 35 something years ago, and last year when this was published, he's saying that it's not an established family to this date, 2023, 2024, in the sense that there was still a long way to go to elicit significant numbers of plausible cognate sets across the branches and to formulate consistent sound correspondences on the basis of those cognates, the most fundamental goals of the comparative method. And I also believe that is still true today. So again, this is published in 2023. This is last year. What is needed is still a reconstruction of the earlier stages of the other branches of Afroasiatic besides Egyptian and Semitic. I'll skip this one. That's not important, but I just wanted to emphasize that. And so he again, in his summary and conclusion, questions whether Afroasiatic exists. He says when he applied the comparative method, he could not establish between Semitic and ancient Egyptian, and because of that, he makes the logical, he comes to a logical conclusion that either Semitic is not Afroasiatic or ancient Egyptian is not Afroasiatic. Because if Semitic and Egyptian cannot be demonstrated to be a genetic relationship, and you believe that at least one of them are Afroasiatic, the other one cannot be Afroasiatic. Otherwise, you would be able to demonstrate the genetic relationship between Semitic and ancient Egyptian, but you can't. So this is what he's saying here. So that's what I wanted to kind of emphasize there, right? But unlike example, of course, this is my work here. We're able to establish, I can establish ancient Egyptian, Chiluba, Collagen, and even Sumerian with regular sound meaning correspondences, consistent across basic vocabulary throughout the entire lexicon. It's light work. And that's what like when we go back to Joseph Greenberg's statement at the beginning of this one right here, right? When he's talking about Fulani, he says, because the establishment of the membership of Fulani in Niger-Congo family excludes the possibility of its membership in the Hamitic group. So what he's saying is that if you show if we Niger-Congo, it cannot show any possibility of genetic relationship with Hamitic languages. And remember that ancient Egyptian is supposed to be a Hamitic language.
So let me pause you here. So in these 10 years of these conversations, when I think that statement right there is what's fueling the claims that people make when how can ancient Egyptian be a quote unquote Bantu language, or how is it that ancient Egyptian is genetically related to a Bantu language such as Chiluba, such as et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So even when it's even suggested that that's the case, people are in disbelief because of that statement right there, because Egyptian is considered Afroasiatic and it's not Niger-Congo, therefore you are performing the impossible. And I've even seen people
Exactly.
I've seen even people even compare it to trying to prove a flat earth, and things like that. So I think that is at the core of it. But because of that, I don't know if you could quickly go back to, well, let me ask you this. Well, no, go ahead, continue, because I do have a question that I don't know if I should ask it now or
Well,
whatever
I
you
just want to
agree.
make this statement in to go with what you just said. So
Okay.
think about this for a second. That Fulani, remember that Fulani is supposed to be closely related to Wolof, which the which Sheikh Anta Diop and Mboli and Obinga has done work showing the relationship between Wolof and ancient Egyptian. So basically, when you say Wolof, Fulani, and Seir, you're talking about one cluster of closely related languages, right? So he's saying that Greenberg is saying that Fulani is Niger-Congo, and it automatically excludes the possibility of its relationship with any Hamitic language. But then here you have Dimmendaal, who's an Africanist, saying Niger-Congo is not a proven genetic unity, meaning it doesn't even exist.
Right. Right.
So you see the confusion, and if you aren't a true student of historical comparative linguistics for one, and African historical linguistics secondly, you wouldn't know these things. You think that you can chat GPT your way into vital information. You got to read books. You got to read all of the information. You got to be able to demonstrate and prove these things on your own. Because just because something is written in the book don't mean jack. Demonstration beats conversation. You got to be able to come back and follow up and do the work yourself and then come to your own conclusions. But many linguists have already done this, including the one that I just Mr. Wright that I cited earlier, and so his demonstration is in the book that I showed. And so when everyone who does and applies the standard comparative method to ancient Egyptian and the so-called Hamido-Semitic, it never pans out. And just like the other citation says, every single time, they try to here we go. It says, when we read the most striking works of the great Africanists from the beginning of the 20th century, we are struck by a really massive fact. It's that they almost never explain the theoretical support. They start fumbling and mumbling, trying to avoid the question. But everybody else who is competent and does the actual work comes to drastically different conclusions than the Africanist. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that leads me to my question, and maybe I need to ask you this question now, and then I could probably go backwards and ask you another question. But this question now, because it's kind of led up to this, is with all this being said by these actual PhD linguists, and even some of them being Africanists themselves, saying that Niger Congo is not a genetic reality, then in our conversations over the 10 years, it's been thrown out there or claimed or whatever the case is that you, such as you, Asar Imhotep, or Jean-Claude Mboli, that you all are overturning the whole field of linguistics by challenging the 4 African Language Phyla as proposed by Greenberg. But what it seems like, based on everything we're being shown and demonstrated here, is that there's really nothing to be overturned. It's actually the work actually being done in the first place. Like the work is finally actually being done. So is there some truth to that, or what?
Yeah,
what's the story behind that?
You hit it right on the head. That's what's being done. It's just like, if I go back to that one quote. So this is, again, coming from Auchenwald and Dixon, right? Remember, they said for Niger Congo, all we can say is that there has far been no principal justification for this as a language family. As Dimmendaal states in this as section 3, so Dimmendaal has an article in that text, and they're just quoting from his chapter in section 3. By the criteria of regular sound correspondences among the languages and of the reconstruction of protoforms, Niger Congo is not a proven genetic unity. It may well be that, as Heine Kuteva say, Greenberg's genetic classification of African languages is by now widely accepted. But being widely accepted, therefore amongst Africanists, does not equate with has been scientifically justified. And that's what we keep trying to get them to understand. Just because you have a whole bunch of people who regurgitate certain information does not mean it has been scientifically justified. And they are so incompetent in the subject that they wouldn't be able to tell you how they justified, what text they justified it in, where they justified it. They don't have any of this information. So they would rather not face you, because remember, I'm supposed to have this debate and discussion on this subject with about 100 different folks, and everybody, of course, runs.
That goes all the way back to 2014, right about 10 years
all
ago.
the way back. Everybody runs because they don't have this information. And once they get a peep, see, the problem is I keep showing this stuff. I should just wait, and if they show up, then hit them with the bombs and make them justify. But because I showed this stuff early, then all of a sudden they don't want to show up and have the conversations no more. Because you can levy those arguments against me, but you can't argue against the pure lemon pledge smelling white PhD linguist who's printing these statements.
But and you know what's crazy is that this goes back even before 2014. But as you said, as soon as you know a serious conversation is supposed to happen, all of a sudden it gets canceled or people run. But now I noticed that every step of the way there's a new resurgence of it. So now with the onset of the God ChatGPT, there's people that are feeling a little froggy and jumping out there and trying to bring these subjects up again, only to be knocked right back down into the side again with these same slides and same citations as you know you've been showing for the past 10 years, with the exception of obviously the 2023. But these things have been said over and over again, and there's no getting around it. So it's like, that's why I said, I think the other slide you were showing when it said that that exclusion slide where it says that if, for example, Fulani is placed with Niger Congo, then there's no need to try to compare it with other things, because by doing so, it's supposed to be exclusively within that grouping. And so anybody who makes attempts to compare it with another quote unquote unverified or unscientifically justified phylum, they seem to do so, in a silly way. And it's being compared, I've heard, with people trying to prove the flat earth, type of thing.
In other words, they're trying to prescribe destiny. They're trying to set the limits on what you can compare without demonstrating this fact or this hypothesis as a fact.
Right.
They're trying to say they're just trying to use, I don't even know by what authority or whatnot, other than their whiteness. You can't compare, because I get this all the time. You can't compare Bantu and ancient Egyptian. Says who? A scientist goes where the evidence goes. You can't prescribe. You can only come to a conclusion after you've done the work. So if this is the case, tell me who are the esteemed linguists, and what articles did they publish or books where they did a full detailed analysis of Bantu and ancient Egyptian and concluded that you can't that these were unrelated languages. See, what people don't understand is that when you make an argument saying that something is in fact true, the same criteria that is expected for you in regards to the demonstration is the same for if you argue that something is false. Mm-hmm. So you have to use the same efforts, the same amount of data and demonstration to say that this is not it. And when you ask them for that work, well, where's the work that shows us this? They can't tell you, because as the other text says, they almost never show their theoretical support. Where's that citation? When we reread the most striking works of the great Africanists from the beginning of the 20th century, we are struck by a really massive fact. It's that they almost never explain their theoretical support. So when they say that you can't compare Chiluba to ancient Egyptian, okay, well, show me the theoretical support which tells me that I can't do that.
It can't. what had
They
happened
start dilly
was
dallying. They be tap dancing so hard. I thought there was a Nicholas
what
Brothers.
what had happened was ChatGPT went down. I had to use Perplexity for a minute. But so that kind of leads me to another thing I want to kind of go back to, if you're able to, that is, right? So
Uh-huh.
just to offer some clarification, is there a way that you can show the difference between a typological relationship or an example of typological relationships versus true genetic relationships by way of cognacy? Is there, can you show the two? Do you have anything that you can kind of demonstrate to clarify the two different types?
Well, I can show you by way of borrowing. Um, See, and I'm getting ready to do this. I got to rename this because I'm addressing the post on the CETEP in the group.
Okay.
But I'll be restating this again. So this is a good example. Well, because I mean, typology is like if two languages have tones,
Yeah,
whether
maybe that's
two
that's
lang-
the first thing I should ask. Can you just define
you
what
know,
is typology? Maybe you could just explain that real quick first.
it's a type. It's that's is exactly it's a type and then ology. So they have certain characteristics that are shared. So just as how should I say? Let me go back to because I kind of read earlier um, on the Bantu. Let me see. Is it any less Bantu? What was that text? Let's see. Right. So so this kind of speaks on uh, you know typology in a sense. So it says because canonical systems are so typical of Bantu languages, their presence has been used sometimes as a litmus test for membership of the Bantu family. This is unfortunate since having, for example, a gender system. So this would be an example of a typological feature, the gender system. So like even in ancient Egyptian, so how you have the feminine and masculine. If another
Hmm.
language has a feminine and masculine gender, that does not mean that they are genetically related because gender systems can be borrowed. And so in
But they would,
Bantu,
but
you
they
have
would.
this. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was saying, but
Go ahead.
so there, just because two languages have a gender system of
Uh-huh.
masculine and feminine, they don't. That doesn't mean that they are genetically related. But as far as type, that means they
Yeah,
share that
they
typological
carry
feature.
second type. Exactly. So just because, for example, whales live in the water and they appear to look like large fish, they have similar type of body. They have a similar body plan because of their evolution in the water. Although a whale is a mammal and originated on land, which when you go back originated in the water because everybody originates out of water, right? But for the sake of more closely related um, groupings, whales are not fish because they have to breathe air, right? So that's why they pop out of the water every now and then. But they have what appears to be fins and a tail, and they swim in the water. Those are typological features. Sharks have those as well, but sharks are not. Excuse me. Sharks are not mammals. They don't need oxygen. Matter of fact, they'll die standing outside of the water. Right. So these are typological features. So this continuing the reading, this is unfortunate since having a gender system of any kind is a typological feature that can be acquired or lost. It is not a trait that proves genetic relation. A language like Como that has lost all noun classes is no less Bantu than languages such as Sotho and Lingala with a canonical noun system, noun class system. So this is even important even when you're talking about ancient Egyptian, because one of the arguments levied against persons like myself is that ancient Egyptian does not have an elaborate uh, gender system like the Central African Bantu languages. Well, just because it doesn't have a gender system like the Bantu languages, like Chiluba, for example, does not mean that ancient Egyptian is not a Bantu language. So that's what they're saying here for this language here. Como has lost all noun classes; it has none. So if you was just to take a surface look at Como, because it doesn't have the noun class system, you would argue that it's not a Bantu language, but that's a typological feature. So just because, for example, a whale does not have feet and ankles does not mean it's not a mammal. It still belongs to the mammal class of living beings. Right? And so, languages have those kind of similarities. So when you're looking at, so for example, we keep talking about regular sound meaning correspondences, and I specifically use this example here that I'm showing because it doesn't appear, they don't look alike. So if I say itim, meaning to create, itimu, atimwa, breathlessness, itim, to be overflowing, that sounds nothing like pesh coming out of the Sumerian language, meaning to breathe, and also to give birth, to be pregnant, pregnancy, to be thick, to be wide, right? And then tenu, to grow up, to mature, pesh, to grow, to be thick, to be wide, a timid destroyer, a knife, timid powder, timid to powder again, right? And then pesh, to slice. And so we know by the T suffix that there was a verb here originally meaning to cut, which leads to timid here, the partial reduplication meaning powder or to powder. This is the verb. And then with the W nominal suffix here is now in the abstract, so it's powder, right? And then like let's take the last one, Tim cease, to perish, pesh, to disappear, right? And so what I shown here, based on the other criteria, that Sumerian sh corresponds regularly to ancient Egyptian t. So we know that the syllables are inverse, and p corresponds to m. And we reaffirm by adding a third language. So remember, if Bantu is Niger Congo and Sumerian is an isolate and Collagen is Nilo-Saharan, there would be no way that I would be able to make correspondences like this. And we could go line for line, each one. Tim, create. It's the same thing to create, to engender, to be, etc. Right? And then overflowing is kind of like to fill up, to get big, to get wide. And so that's why it's also that word pesh means to grow, right? And to grow and to mature. So M becomes in into vocally. And so, but look at collagen, boost, to breathe, itimu, breathlessness, bird, to conceive, S becomes R, right? So the collagen in this series, the collagen and Sumerian are closer because they have the same forms going back, whereas the Egyptians, it's the inverse. Let's go here. Tenu, to grow up, to mature. Pesh, to grow. And it is a doublet in Egyptian. Pej, to be wide, to stretch, space, expands. And collagen, bit, to grow, get bigger, taller, swell, thicken, sprout, vegetate, develop, enlarge. So you see the semantic range of these terms. Etimit, destroyer. This is why it's always good to understand what the roots are, because the roots are going to are what you are comparing, and then you can see all the grammatical morphemes attached to the roots. So pesh, to slice, bet wheat, small piece of land, parcel of land, but bet meaning to slice, pesh meaning to slice. And it's from slicing that you get to powder. You find some substance that you grind and slice into a powder, right? And so you have Temer, a sacred tree, and collagen tomb forest. But you also have Pesh, fig tree, and then Mokyawa, fig tree, Mokyo. Because in collagen, just like in Sumerian, M and B interchange. So Tim, to cease, to perish, to complete, to make complete, Pesh, to disappear, miss, to die off, to go off, miss, be finished, incomplete. You see, all these are consistent. And even similar vowels in Sumerian, all E's and I. And then in the with the exception of this first one here, which has U, all of these have I and E's, with the exception of this one here, which has O. So like all of this stuff becomes important. But it would, if there was no genetic relationship, it would be impossible. And when I say impossible, I mean impossible. So this is so see what I've done here, and let's go back to where I was going when you first asked the other question, right? So now when we're talking about typological features, right, and in understanding chance, coincidence, and borrowing. So we have in English this word mess, meaning a dirty or untidy state of things or of a place. There's also in this Cochical Mayan language a word mess with one S, meaning mess, disorder, and garbage. Now, on the surface, these look alike and they even have a similar meaning. But as soon as you start looking for regular sound correspondences, you see clearly that there is no pattern that you can discuss. So their word for man is atsi. Their word for mouse is choi. For moon is kata'it. For mother is nan. So this is English. So there's, while this may look alike, once we start going into, trying to establish regular sound meaning correspondences, we can't do it. So, and this is one of the things that I was talking about, why it's important to know about the morphemes, especially if you're trying to engage in vocalization. So the Kanuri language is a Nilotic language, and they're kind of close in proximity to where the Hausa is, because there's Sudan and there's Chad, right? So they're neighbors. So we have this word in Kanuri, revo te, meaning to write in writing, and then kara te, reading. The te suffix in Kanuri is a grammatical feature that forms verbal nouns from verb roots. This feature is absent in Hausa. So if you see this word in Hausa with the same consonant, but you cannot analyze, that's the word we use in linguistics. In other words, you mean it can't be broken down into its component parts. This is the first indication that this is possibly a borrowing. Because if they were genetically related, they would have genetically inherited the grammatical morphemes that made the word. So, but notice, once Hausa borrowed the words, they also pronounced them totally different. So where you have revolte, you have rubuta. and kerate, karatu. So you couldn't use the Hausa to. So let's assume that we had a third language like ancient Egyptian that had this sequence, but you only had knowledge of Hausa, and you would look at Hausa and be like, see, this is how you pronounce it in ancient Egyptian. No, this is a borrowing that Hausa has from Kanuri, and they totally changed the pronunciation. So this is why we got to be careful and not just go with lookalikes. And we have to go deeper and find the languages that are closer to ancient Egyptian when trying to guess for the vocalization. But that's another topic that we're going to address in another text. And this is how the stuff gets inherited in the daughter languages. So let's assume Hausa is a proto-language now, but in the future, it is passed down into these dialects, which will soon become languages. And this is what often happens. So if I'm going into ancient Egyptian and I'm seeing in ancient Egyptian, these are clearly morphemes attached to a root, I need to find a language that has the exact same morphemes and the root, because those are the ones that's going to be closer. Because in these forms, because what happen is somebody is trying to make it seem like it's Semitic, make it seem like this is a triliteral. It's a triconsonantal word. And that's the dangers of borrowing. But yeah, we'll skip that. So I'll be dealing with this and some other issues on Friday. But
Okay.
if you have any other questions.
Let me see. I'm just trying to see. I don't think so. I just want to looking at my
Just one more.
okay.
Just one more. So which page is this? 359. So when I go back, so this is from the book. This is revised and edited by Robert McMillar. This is Trass's Historical Linguistics. So again, more white men with PhDs in linguistics writing texts. So this is the 4th edition, right? And so what's the date that this was published? Let's go down to the copyright page, and you can see this is 2023. So this is a relatively recent. This is a recent publication. So this isn't something from 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000. Right? This is 2023. This is last year. Right? So there's a section on here. So this is teaching you how to do historical comparative linguistics. Right? So let's just go. We're going to skip down because he has a whole little section on our favorite anthropologists. Right? Joseph Greenberg. Let me, here we go. So can y'all see? Let me see if
Yep,
I
you can see
can.
it.
I know
Yeah,
there's
that's better.
a,
Whatever you just
hold
did
on,
seemed
there's
like
a
it
full
got bigger.
screen option. Nope, I don't need that. Let me
And you
exit
just
out of
made it
there.
smaller.
Hold on. I may have too much stuff open, so let me wait a second. Otherwise, I may have to reopen it.
That left sidebar when it was gone, that was good enough.
It's not there. There you go. So let me. I'm trying to.
Yeah, there you go.
Hold on. There's a. Where is? Can I?
Here we go. So I want to go to full screen mode so that the reader can let me uh, oop, nope, nope. Oh,
There you go.
okay.
There you go. 200.
Put 210. I'm
That
just
was
trying to
good.
make sure that the that the audience can read it as I go along. Right.
You're looking
So
at
I
it on
have
the
some
YouTube
stuff kind
side.
of. I'm sorry.
I said I'm looking at it on YouTube side. It should be big enough.
All right. So hopefully, so I'm starting on page 359. So there's a little dialogue box, and it says case study Greenberg's mass comparison. So you mentioned like what's the difference between the genetic. So I gave an example of the regular sound meaning correspondences using my work, and so we're going to discuss the mass comparison of Joseph Greenberg. So this is another well-established linguist, and he's given some insight into uh, Greenberg here. So again, this is not an Afrocentrist. This is not a biome to kind of understand this stuff in these, the direction of the Lemon Pledge, brilliant, shining, non-biased, uh, expert white man to to guide the dumb big lip Negroes who are trying to look smart by talking about linguistics in the minds of some of these Negropeans on YouTube, right? So he he goes on to state the Nostradicus and Nostradic is supposed to be the super phylum that consists of languages out of Africa, Afroasiatic, Asia, and Indo-European, right? And other languages. So it's a super almost like a world language, like proto-world almost, right? So which was I don't know if Joseph Greenberg started it, but he's definitely was a proponent of Nostradic. So uh, so let's continue. The Straticists, as we saw in chapter 8, have clung firmly to established historical methods in which systematic correspondences are identified, proto languages are reconstructed, and regular phonological developments are worked out for each daughter. Not everyone is convinced, however, that this painstaking procedure is the only useful way of identifying genetic linkages. There have always been a few linguists who were prepared to adopt a quite different approach called mass comparison, which we have already touched upon. The idea of mass comparison is simple. You collect some hundreds of thousands of words from which whatever languages you are interested in, you put those words side by side to see if any languages seem to show an unusual number of resemblances. And if any do, you declare a genetic relationship between those languages. So this is what I have highlighted. This, of course, is exactly the approach which I dismissed earlier as unworkable. So he's another one against Greenberg's mass comparative method. The overwhelming majority of historical linguists similarly reject this approach. It has never in modern times been regarded as respectable, and those occasional linguists who tried to employ it have invariably found themselves dismissed as cranks.
That's a new word.
Do you,
Crank.
do, do you see what I'm reading? Do you hear the words that's coming out of my mouth? Right. So we had another one called them astrologists, and this one is calling them a crank. A prominent example of the early 20th century Italian linguist Alfredo Trombetti
whose enthusiastic embrace of large-scale mass comparisons led to a storm of abuse aimed in this direction. As one modern sympathizer remarks, they practically ran him out of the linguistics community. So there have been others who tried this. So you had one called Alfredo Trombetti, and they ran him out of the community, like they trying to do Mboli, but you can't do it because you need to know linguistics to do it, right? In spite of such depressing precedences, one recent linguist firmly championed the method of mass comparison, now renamed multilateral comparison. This was the late Joseph Greenberg, whose comment about Trombetti I just quoted. Greenberg was, by any standard, a distinguished and influential linguist. For example, in his early 1960s, he almost single-handedly touched off an explosion of interest in linguistic typology and universals, in which now such a prominent feature of our linguistic landscape. But Greenberg was also, throughout his career, deeply interested in genetic relationships. I'm going to skip down. He talks about him starting off with Australian languages and then jumping into African languages. So I'm going to skip down. In a series of publications culminating in his brilliant 1963 work on African languages, he substantially reorganized some recognized families, most notably by scrapping the venerable but clearly creaky Hamido-Semitic family in favor of an Afroasiatic family with at least 5 coordinate branches. Really, he did not change anything but the name. And I think they may have added Omatic to it. But Afroasiatic is Hamido-Semitic. So they just changed the name. He moved some languages out of one family and into another, like Fulani, and most dramatically, he reduced all the 1,500 or so African languages to just 4 families, should be phyla. He did this by applying multilateral comparison, that is, by the rapid inspection of hundreds of words and grammatical forms from each of hundreds of languages, with languages showing sizable numbers of resemblances being grouped together. In spite of his suspect methodology. So notice what I highlighted. What did he call it?
Yep, suspect.
Suspect methodology. Greenberg's new language map of Africa was so obviously a great improvement on previous conceptions. So if Greenberg is bad, the people before him was just ludicrous. Right? So I think that's part of the reason why it's accepted, because when you look at the people before him, it was just a wild, wild west. And so Greenberg, as suspect as the methodology is, it brought some sense of order to the African languages. And that's why, because they just didn't have any better working models. So they just accepted it. Right? So today, hold on. Today, while many of the details naturally remain controversial, there is almost no serious opposition to Greenberg's 4 families. There really is, and that is still followed Benga's Negro-Egyptian, which he doesn't mention here. At least being the best interpretation presently possible and based on prior comparative work. Greenberg's method was nothing short of heresy, but to the astonished community of linguists, it appeared to work. Although C. Campbell and Poser, who we just cited earlier, in particular discussion of the veracity of some of the constructs involved. So let me see. I'm going to skip down. He's talking about Greenberg now trying to apply the mass comparison to the Austronesian and Papua New Guinea languages in the Pacific. So the Indo-Pacific hypothesis has had mixed reception. Several specialists greeted it with enthusiasm. For example, Blust found it bold and brilliant, showing Greenberg at his best. Others, however, were far from impressed. The inclusion of the Tasmanian languages has been particularly controversial. For example, the Australian specialists Crowley and Dixon considered this move outrageous. And I have this highlighted. It seems fair to conclude that Indo-Pacific has already attained the status of, say, Altaic. accepted unhesitatingly as but rejected by other equally distinguished specialists as unsubstantiated speculation. So this is what's going on even with the African. You have African specialists who use the comparative method saying that, you know, these four phyla are unsubstantiated, but then you have these Africanists who are saying that, you know, this is, you know, we accept this, you know, even though it's not perfect. That's Dimmendaal that we mentioned earlier, right? This mild scholarly controversy, however, provided only the slightest taste of what was to happen to Greenberg's next proposal. So he goes and talks about how he tried to do this in North American languages, and he created this superphylum called Amerindian, right? If I told you that the Amerindian hypothesis is controversial, I would hardly be doing justice to the facts. The truth is that a storm of outrage, protests, and furious condemnation broke over Greenberg's head, the like of which was rarely been seen in linguistics. If the general public think of historical linguists at all, they probably, and I'm gonna read this slowly because you're gonna appreciate this, Brother Rujawu. If the general public think of historical linguists at all, they probably think of us as quiet, meek, bespectacled eccentrics poring over moldering books and cluttered studies and rarely venturing any comment more offensive than a polite modification of somebody's proposed Proto-Dravidian word for elbow. This is not the way it looked to Greenberg. Greenberg's critics, who are numerous and often very distinguished, applied to his work such phrases as worthless, illusory, unsupported, distressing, crude and puerile, irrelevant nonsense, misguided and dangerous, and completely unscientific. One critic described the attention given to Greenberg's ideas as really depressing and suggested that Greenberg should be shouted down, while another inventive critic coined a new term of abuse just to throw at Greenberg. He accused Greenberg of, and I don't know how you would pronounce this, but I'm going to try to say it slow, columbicubiculomania, or an obsession with putting things into pigeonholes. At the same time, Greenberg was not without his equally distinguished supporters, who praised his boldness and imagination, declared his Amerindian grouping obviously correct, and on occasion attacked the critics for what they considered unfair distortions and misrepresentations of Greenberg's work. Quite apart from their contempt for the very method of multilateral comparison, Greenberg's critics make a number of more substantial points. They complain that Greenberg often ignored reliable and up-to-date sources of information in favor of antiquated and defective ones. They complain that he sometimes neglected the best studied languages altogether, and most importantly, they complain that his data contain a simply enormous number of errors. In reply, Greenberg took the rather unexpected line that his method is so powerful, so effective at finding genetic links that none of this matters. Scanty and defective materials, he argued, will reveal a relationship just as well as the abundant materials of good quality. Few critics have found this response reassuring. Let me see.
GTP is not going to like this.
So he's talking about the flaws of trying to compare, trying to use Greenberg's classifications with genetics. I'm gonna skip that, save that for another time when somebody try to think you can merge genetics and linguistics. Such coincidence between the findings of historical linguistics of linguists and those of other disciplines is unprecedented, and many linguists have reacted with astonishment, disbelief, and suspicion. While 19th century linguists were inclined to see language as part and parcel of culture and race, modern linguists have in complete contrast generally regarded as central tenet that languages show no particular tendency to correspond to genetic or physical differences. Let me skip this. There's something else I wanted to get. Yeah, that's still talking about. So
Let me see. Nope, nope, nope. I don't have it highlighted, but it's just something that says, what strikes me, da, 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 da. One possible approach to the evaluation of multilateral comparison might be to apply it to an area which has already been well mapped out by conventional methods to see if we get the same result. We might, for example, look at Europe in order to ascertain whether the recognized Indo-European erratic families, da, da, da. However, unless we count Greenberg's work on
Wait, look
African
look at number
languages,
two. Look at number two above. That one, two, three.
well, let me put it in context. So let me just read. So, what are we to make of all of this? So he's kind of, kind of summing up and whatnot. So he's saying, what are we to make of all of this? Can Greenberg's seemingly simple-minded method really be so devastatingly effective at uncovering genetic relationships, even at astounding time depths, even as he himself claimed, with only scanty and defective materials to work with? Or was he, as his numerous critics claim, merely deluding himself by collecting fistfuls of meaningless chance resemblances to be found everywhere and arranging them into pretty patterns to suit himself like a child playing with a big box of buttons? There seem to me, broadly speaking, to be three possible responses to Greenberg's work.
Mm-hmm.
One, mass comparison is all by itself adequate to establish previously undetected genetic groupings. That's basically the Africanist. Number
Mm-hmm.
two, mass comparison is not of itself adequate to establish genetic links, but it is nonetheless valuable in throwing up promising hypotheses for further investigation by conventional methods. And then three, mass comparison is worthless for any purpose and is indeed pernicious and obstructive of serious work. So now
Right.
he goes in.
Those
So
three
those are the three
possibilities.
possibilities. Yeah.
And
He
and
says, what
and
strikes
number
me?
two. Okay, go ahead.
Go
Sorry.
ahead. Go ahead.
No, number two seems to be in alignment with. I think you were quoting Dixon at the time. You had the slide up where it was saying that Greenberg's mass comparison really when all the smoke clears is really the starting point of the process and not the conclusion, not the finish line. Where somewhere where I read that on one of your slides, it said that okay, the mass comparison was never intended to be the answer or the conclusion or to prove genetic relationships. Is merely a starting point or something to that effect. I'm paraphrasing.
And I wish I had my old
I'm
Facebook.
sure I saw that.
Still had access to my old Facebook account because I would pull up a picture of a gentleman who is a brother who's a linguist, but he's a sociolinguist. But he is of the school, so he went to school with my professors who studied, and Christopher Errett was their advisors for their dissertation. And we were at a conference in Texas, um, a linguistic conference, and he was telling me about Greenberg, and what he was saying is essentially number two. That for
Mm-hmm.
and he knew Greenberg, and so he was saying that uh, for Greenberg, it really was a starting point, and but the expectation was for the follow up for them to use the comparative method to establish everything, but that was never done. They just stuck to the mass comparison and multilateral method and then use that to make the genetic arguments and grouping instead of. But the question you have to ask is, well, why didn't y'all just apply? Because remember what I said earlier, and I know I'm fragment talking, that in order to say something is false, it requires the same rigor as if you said something is true. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you already group these languages together, so if you argue that there's Chadic, if you argue there's Cushitic, et cetera, and you group them into Afroasiatic, and remember that Greenberg, remember, see, this part is overlooked. Let me go back to it because I kind of breezed through that.
this statement made by Greenberg, right? So remember, so when he made that statement, he says, "As for Meinhoff's proof of the Hamitic relationship of Fulani in this German text, I discuss it only briefly here because the establishment of the membership of Fulani in the Niger-Congo family excludes the possibility of membership in the Hamitic group. But here's the part that's skipped. The Hamitic and Niger-Congo may ultimately be related." No, excuse me. That Hamitic and Niger-Congo may ultimately be related is, of course, possible, and there are a few indications that this is so. But this does not, of course, imply a special position for Fulani as against the hundreds of other Niger-Congo languages. So he already had discovered that some scant evidence of the relationship between Niger-Congo and Afroasiatic. But he never got a chance to work diligently on that. And so in reality, when you think about it, Cheikh Anta Diop, Theophile Obenga, and Jean-Claude Mboli have actually finished the work of Greenberg, completed the work of Greenberg, who already in 1963 was detecting a relationship between Afroasiatic and Niger-Congo. And so when Theophile Obenga applied the comparative method to these languages, he was forced to do what you do in science, and that's to get rid of the theory that that no longer agrees with the evidence. And he came up with a new theory, which he called Negro Egyptian. And so with the Negro Egyptian, it groups all of the languages except Berber and Semitic that was grouped into Afroasiatic, and he keeps Niger-Congo, he keeps Nilo-Saharan, and he puts in his Negro Egyptian Cushitic, Omatic, and Chadic. So all of those groups, with the exclusion of Berber, Semitic, and Khoisan, is what is Negro Egyptian for Theophile Obenga, 1993. So all Obenga did was complete the work that was suggested by Greenberg. But by doing it via the comparative method. And the same thing with Mboli improving on Obenga's work. See, this is what people are missing because they don't read. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's good. I was just going to share this right here. This is Dimmendaal statement that I was talking about, where he says at the bottom, mass comparison was a method for discovering valid relationships. That is a discovery procedure, especially intended to probe remote relationships. It was never meant to be a formal method for providing proof. And that's Dimmendaal, who is an Africanist.
Yep.
And then we have who is this here? This is Gerrit Klein, Brian Joseph, and Matthias Fritz. This is an edited work. This is a textbook, Handbook of Comparative and Historical Indo-European Linguistics, where it says, where was the important point? I'll just read this paragraph. It says, this situation changed with the publication of a series of articles by Joseph Greenberg, an African linguist classification, a revised version of which appeared later as a monograph entitled The Languages of Africa, 1963. In this famous book, the author provided a complete, and this is in quotes, a complete genetic classification. There's the famous quotes again. One that distinguishes 4 genetic phyla. And that's when you get where in your slide where it said that he apparently definitely used the term genetic differently than those other people, each containing a number of families and subfamilies. It is this taxonomy that in subsequent years was used most frequently by other scholars as a point of departure for new attempts at classifying African language groups. And so that runs hand in hand, where Greenberg's method and outcomes is really, to a comparative, is really just a starting point and was never intended to be serve as proof and so on. So I just wanted to kind of show that. That was it.
Exactly. So this is the reason why we have to have discussions on the methods used. And it's only so far that we're going to be in these discussions with folks who don't study linguistics and don't read the text for learning how to study. See, what they'll do is try to do some Google searches and try to find some phrases that they think agrees with them and try to use that to win an argument online. And keep in mind, I have more. A lot of these citations and more I put in my 2020 text. But of course, they don't read. See, I had to show this stuff to Dr. Shamarka Keita because he would try to argue with me as well. And, he's the kind that, I understand. He's a PhD and, he's one of my teachers and guides. But sometimes you got to, pop out and show professors, that you got that homework too. And once I start showing him all of this stuff, then he had to change his tune. But he was willing to do that once I showed him the sheer amount of work on this subject, and not only the amount of critiques but the quality of the critiques. But he's a scientist, bona fide, so he's willing to change his perspective with the advent of new evidence, not the Negropeans on YouTube with the podcast mics.
All right, so I think we've been at it for 3 hours now. So if anybody has any questions in the chat, if we have a little bit of time, any questions in the chat, I actually put the panel link into the chat as well because that's the easier way to engage, just by speaking, because it's a delay. It's like a little lag from the chat. But either way, if you have any questions, feel free to ask now. Other than that, we're going to start wrapping it up. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for that, either click on the link or ask your question in the chat. Just kind of summarize what we discussed again. Just kind of do a quick final summary. So the first thing is basically, what is a linguist, and are all linguists made alike? And so that was clearly defined, and the fact that the answer is no, not all linguists are alike. And this goes for any field, even in medical field. You can specialize in one area and know very little, or not be too competent in another area of medicine as well. I mean, that happens all the time. So that was discussed. Then make sure we didn't miss anything. No, we didn't miss anything. Okay, and then in terms of Greenberg himself, so a little bit of history about Greenberg was given. Why his name, constantly pops up, because his Greenberg and his method has been widely accepted. But just like the word consensus, there's a popular consensus versus a scientific consensus, or even a consensus among the actual doers of a particular discipline, the actual participants in a certain field. Just because something is popular or widely accepted, it doesn't mean that it's scientifically justified, as Asar showed and quoted. And that's the case with Joseph Greenberg. And that kind of answers the question of why is it still used? Why is it still, we find it quoted, Greenberg, Afroasiatic, Niger, Congo. Why do people still use these groupings if they don't really exist as genetic entities? And so another answer for that is, as Asar told us, was that in the 1960s, when all this stuff was going down, the people prior to Greenberg, stuff was just so trashy that when Greenberg came on the scene, he was a breath of fresh air. And so it found favor with a lot of people in the field. It was a better way to organize the languages and so on and so forth. And so that kind of fueled the acceptance and the long-lasting effect of it even to this day. But now there's new so-called kids on the block. As one I forgot what slide you showed or who you were quoting, Asar, but where it says the need for as Africans themselves who speak the language become linguists. Who was that? I forgot who you were quoting on that. As more Africans who speak the language or whatever become linguists and everything, then it would add to, I guess, the body of knowledge or whatever the case is. And that's essentially what's going on now. With the likes of Mboli, with the likes of Obenga, Diop, and recent with Mboli, 2010 work. And one thing about Mboli's work is see, Mboli having the understanding of everything that we're saying tonight about Greenberg's classification, Mboli's work did not start where Greenberg left off, so to speak. Mboli dispensed with Greenberg's groupings. He's like, nope, those are not real. Those are not actual genetic relationships. So I'm not going to be barred. And Mboli said, I'm not going to be barred by saying that this language is in this phylum and this language is in that phylum. Therefore, I can't compare them. And Mboli was like, he wasn't restricted to that line of thinking, which no scientist would. I think I saw you got it on the screen. Yep, there it is. D. Darby or Dalby. We will also have to wait for the very speakers of these languages who have become linguists to attack comparative linguistics in order to elucidate the relationships of multiple languages, neighboring and related or not. See? And that is where Obenga, Bilolo, Diop, Mboli, Oduyoye, these African, native African scholars who have their own mother tongue and doing these comparisons, that's where they come into play, as Dalby said. So,
as you can see, for the Negropeans, the white man is giving black people permission to study their own languages, and so it's all right now that we can come out and do this work because the white man is giving us permission.
exactly.
So y'all should be happy with the outcomes of the African scholars.
Right. I guess a question I didn't ask, but I'm trying to see if anybody had any questions. So listen, I'm gonna assume that everybody in the chat has been satisfied, and I shouldn't expect any arguments or fussing and fighting about this, because if it is, it can only be people who have not seen this video. And even still, people could watch this video and still try to argue and fight. But MBK is going to timestamp this, and we'll just be able to refer to the timestamp, because I'm not going to find myself keep repeating this stuff over and over and over again. But it's something that I didn't ask you, though, so maybe we can use this to close out, because I don't see any questions from other people.
Will you ask your question? Then I think I have two questions I can ask after.
Oh, no, go ahead. You can go first.
Okay. So these are not related with Greenberg per se, but I think because the video has kind of turned out to be somewhat of a compendium of all the necessary questions that people or clear up for all the questions and misunderstandings that goes around this particular topic, especially the language families, and also just the process of linguistics and whatever. So I think I wanted to ask these two questions. I know we've discussed them on this issue, but it's just good to have them on this video. So one of the questions, or one of the things that came up on a different discussion, was that when you do comparative linguistics or comparative method, and in your findings, they need to line up or match up with other fields, let's say genetics, archaeology, per se, for that particular finding to be factual. Is that true or false? And would you like to, Asar, would you like to kind of clarify that, and for the audience?
No, it's false, and I don't know who made that up. But you always met people. I don't know if people think that I'm being condescending when I'm always stressing method. Method is always going to be the most important thing, because two things here. Of course, demonstration beats conversation, and then how you do anything is how you do everything. And if you're sloppy, if you put trash into the process, only trash can come out of the process. And so this is why we have to be very diligent in asking the kinds of questions of how do the two meet. So the question you have to ask is, well, what aspect of language is detectable via archaeology outside of writing, or in biogen?
Oh, it looks like Asar jumped out for some reason. Okay, so we'll wait for him to pop back in. But that's an excellent question. That is something that comes up a lot. Is the moment you start talking about languages, people who are, and I think Asar is coming back, and I'm just gonna allow him to finish. You jumped out. There you go.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with your. I'm really starting to think now it is StreamYard. I mean, not StreamYard. Restream. Because I don't know why it's kicking me out like that.
It's a
Again, it's
conspiracy.
probably conspiracy. I'm telling you. But I forgot. What did you hear last?
Now you said basically, where did the two converge? What archaeology? What aspect of archaeology outside of writing? Blah blah blah. I think that's where you stopped.
All right, and so I said next. Well, what component of language is detectable via DNA? Is it in a Y or X haplogroups? Is it in another area of the code? Where can we go to find the language grouping that a person spoke? And then how does it show up in the DNA if they spoke multiple languages? Right? And when you start asking these questions, you discover that it's impossible for them to determine what language any group of people spoke before the advent of writing. And so they don't coincide at all. You can start to make those kind of comparisons now, because just like the DNA is encoded in the genes and in the actual fossils, the language is now encoded in recordings, it's recorded in writing. We can date stuff now, but prior to our modern conventions and notations of languages and the like, you couldn't do that for the past. And so that there's a part of that last text that I skipped that deals with that, where it looked promising that Greenberg and Sfoza, I think his name is. I'm sorry, I'm butchering the name. um, it looked like the linguistics and the genetics were coming in sync, but then new discoveries was showing that the languages, that the Native Americans were here some 30 to 50,000 years ago in the Americas. So now Greenberg's arguments fell completely apart, re-emphasizing that you can't link language and genetics, because there's no way you can tell what language, because we got to let me finish the statement, what language a person whose remains have been fossilized spoke at some ancient time. And so this is why it's dangerous trying to mix this stuff without understanding the rules that govern solid facts in each individual field separately before trying to bring them together. And that's the dangers here.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
No, it is, and I know that to be the case a lot of times. I mean, even outside of arguing or fussing, I noticed that just about everybody does that. When linguistics is brought up, people inject into the conversation genetics, DNA, haplotypes, haplogroups, and things like that. And even so much to say that they'll say Nilo-Saharan speakers, and they'll overlay that with genetics and trying to make a point. And, and so with this understanding of what's explained tonight, that Greenberg's classifications in and of themselves is not a scientific justification of genetic relationships between those languages, meaning there's no proof that they descend from common parents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because that's not what that work reflects. That even those arguments about genetics doesn't even make sense. And even the genetic arguments, even if you stay in biology and don't even come out of biology, those genetic populations don't even translate over to another field of ethnicity, on that side of cultural anthropology. They don't overlay, because you could be a part of, you could have two distinct ethnic groups, very distinct ethnic groups of people that are part of the same genetic population, though. They're part of the same genetic population, but they're still two distinct group of people, two different languages, different customs, and so on and so on. And we'll get mad if you call one the other and the other one the one, such as Igbo and Yoruba, as an example. And so it's not very meaningful to even go that route. But we've been talking about this for 10 years, and what I chalk it up to is that people do it out of ignorance. It's out of the lack of reading or understanding. And so it's just going to continue until people decide to actually pick up books and read and get these fundamental points under their belt. But yeah. MK, you see you had two.
For example, keep in mind that we already read where Dimmendaal himself, an Africanist, saying that there's no scientific justification for Niger Congo. So in essence, Niger Congo is not a valid construct. So what do you now do with all those arguments talking about Niger Congo speakers that you have linked to certain E1, B1, A/32.B, and all this other kind of stuff? Because Niger Congo doesn't exist. It's not a fact. And as an analogy that I always give, it's like trying to argue whether the belt that Santa Claus is wearing is Gucci, or Fendi. Well, Santa Claus himself doesn't exist.
Right.
So the belt is neither. The belt don't exist, right? And that's what they're trying to do now. But people because they're not researchers, they're not scholars. They just like to argue online for no reason. And so you just can't be right. So no matter what amount of evidence that you provide, they cannot accept it, even from their beloved people that they try to use against you.
Right.
And that's just at that point you just got to be like, you right, and just move on and let them, they just got to grow old and die.
That kind of brings up another question, but MK, you said you had another one before I asked my last one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the next question is really a statement, and maybe Arsa will kind of explain himself. Is because there's a claim that has been made about following the right procedure in academia, and that is that you first have your work published in a journal before you publish a book. And so, because you and, for example, Mboli have been publishing these books. So the question is, why don't you, get your work in a journal first and then publish those 400 to 600 pages book after that?
These are people that don't know what the hell they're talking about, as usual. A lot of people publish the book first because the subject matter in which they are discussing is too grand to be to try to fit into a journal article, because a journal article you have to be very narrow and specific. And so what they'll do is publish the larger work and then create a smaller argument using the larger data from. And this is what I'm doing with even the one on Kemet. And so there's an aspect of the discussion that I purposely did not add into the book just so I can make a journal article out of it. But certain things had to be already flushed out in a larger uh, discourse, so that I can just take the important parts and just reference the larger work, and put only what is necessary for the one argument for the journal article. And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to add. I
Yep.
want to add. I want to add to that some journal editors, some journal publications, they actually bar you from using an existing published work to take a clip of it and then use it as a journal article. They want unpublished material, and so when people do publish the book, which a lot of people do, especially on extensive topics like comparative linguistics, and I'm just elaborating on what Asar, what you just saying, the fact that you excluded something from your published book and you're gonna use it. You're gonna use what you excluded as a journal article, but now you can actually source or reference your larger publications. That's the way that even a lot of journals actually, that's how you almost have to do it, because you can't write a larger work and then just take like, let's say a chapter out of it and just copy and paste and then submit it to a journal. Some journals don't allow that, or they don't prefer that, in terms of publishing and all of the I guess legal aspects of that. So that's another thing. So
Exactly.
just what
And
you're doing
matter of
is
fact, people do this with their PhD dissertations. Like the PhD dissertation is already peer reviewed, but they'll take an aspect, because a peer that your like a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation is the beginnings of certain research. Like, people think like it's the completed research. It's really not. It's the beginning of an ongoing research project. So your dissertation will just be the base work, and then there's other aspects for which you can elaborate on, or you have new findings that you want to put in a journal article. And
right.
so again, these people, like, I have articles published in journals. People don't they how and where and what's the process of journal publication, right? Like they just like to talk out of their behinds, and it's like, no, that so that like what I'm going to be publishing in the journal is not in my book, but there are aspects of it that are in the book, but there's certain things that I had to flush out in the larger text that I could just now, like in my larger text, I may have a table that has 20 entries in the table. I can now take that table and reduce it to 5 entries and put it in the journal article.
With the C More and Imhotep 2023.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
Because
better sense.
that these are where you do the workouts, and you just put the the more refined aspect of it into the journal article. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nah, and then not to mention that we have instances where people, by way of favors, get articles published in journals that are sloppily formatted and put in journals. So, that's just not good either. But yeah, Amy Cat, was that it for your
Yeah, that
two
was it,
questions?
and that's good because the perception that we got from this kind of questioning was that nobody can take you seriously, or nobody can take the particular work you're discussing seriously until it's in a journal.
Right, and that's backwards. And we explained this. I tried to explain it that, like, in Bowley's work, for example, in Bowley's work is what, 658 pages. His 2010 work. There is no way possible that work could fit in a journal article. I don't know of any journal article that has that many pages for a single article in an edited work. That just doesn't even make sense. It's not practical. None of the above. But here's
Exactly.
my question. This will probably be the last question then.
All
And it
right.
was kind of based. It's based on the whole Emiket's question about the genetics, and how genetics is not a one for one overlay with linguistics and genetics and DNA and all the biological conversations. But there has been, like, things thrown out there about Bantu and the origin, the geographical location of the Bantu migration, and how that doesn't match the proposed Negro Egyptian actual genetic grouping of Mboli and things like that, and whatnot. So what do you say to those kind of arguments, where when they try to talk about the Bantu expansion starting in West Africa or wherever, and so on and so forth? How do you reconcile that?
Hold on one second. Trying to find, because I've addressed this partly in what was supposed to be the Sumerian and Bantu debate. Another example of running at its finest. But so I'm gonna hide that, and just let me know when you can see everything full screen.
Yep, I can see it.
Right. So I think so this was, let me just, I gotta find the slide, but while we're doing that, this is supposed to be the debate between Gabrielle Bada and myself on this Sumerian and Bantu language. And I started off the conversation like, who made the argument that Sumerian was a Bantu language? Because I never made that claim, right? And then I go into the details of saying that no one has made that claim, right? So when you read all the work like J.F. van Oort, The Origin of the Bantu, a preliminary study, he does a comparison between Bantu and ancient Egyptian. This was like in the 1800s. Excuse me, not ancient Egyptian, Bantu languages and Sumerian. Then you had the comparative study of the Bantu and the semi-Bantu languages by Sir Henry Hamilton Johnson, 1919. Sumerian and Bantu. Never made the argument that Sumerian was a Bantu language. Then you have the 1935 text by Willibard P. Wagner, Comparative Lexical Study of Sumerian and Intu. Never makes a claim that Sumerian is a Bantu language. Then you have Dr. G.J.K. Campbell Dunn talking about Sumerian and Niger Congo. You have Robin Walker text When We Ruled, but the person who puts who has a chapter in this text is how I forget his name that fast.
Hammerstein
Uh,
or something.
no. It's
Oh,
damn it. I don't have the book in front of me. I'll think of his name later. But it's someone else that's in brother Robin Walker and Hermstein who wrote these texts, Black Sumer, the African Origins of Civilization. He doesn't argue that Sumerian is a Bantu language. Neither does Jean-Claude Mboli, right? And so they are arguing that, with the exception of Mboli believes that Sumerian has been highly influenced by Negro Egyptian. But all the other scholars mentioned here argues that Bantu and Sumerian share the same ancestor language. So they split. Bantu split one way and Sumerian split another way. So the first when this person agreed to this, read any of my texts, he just agreed, just disagreed for the sake of disagreeing. So I don't even know. So this was our good brother Garfield trying to run from our debate, which was supposed to be, are the ancient Egyptians black? So he runs from that debate, and then he pulls this guy out of the hat who himself ran at last minute, right? But that's neither here nor there. I just want to say that. But saying all that to say that in that discussion, you have to even define and determine if Bantu is even in a language group. So here's Roger Blinch, one of those that the anthropologist who writes regarding linguistics. So in a text, Niger Congo, an alternative view, statement under Bantu, definitely not a group. This may seem surprising in the light of published claims to the contrary, but the argument from comparative linguistics, which links the highly diverse languages of Zone A to a genuine reconstruction, is non-existent. Most claim Proto-Bantu is either confined to particular subgroups or is widely attested outside of Bantu proper, right? And so in another article titled the Bantoid Languages, it says, although Bantu has been treated as a genetic unity since the middle of the 19th century, it remains an open question as to whether there is any distinctive boundary between Bantu and the languages related to it. So that's why I showed you in that first map. This is why they're saying Niger Congo A and Niger Congo B instead of really using the word Bantu. They'll just say Niger Congo B. Because there's becoming doubt that there's even a Bantu family per se, because there's no distinction between Bantu and quote unquote Niger Congo, which we also show is not a genetic unity either. So it's just all kinds of confusion when it comes to African languages. But I'm just showing you all these contradictions from all these purified and dignified lemon pledge spelling white PhDs when it comes to African language. So He says whether there is any distinctive boundary between Bantu languages related to it. Bantuists continue to defend the integrity of their discipline, but no lexical or morphological isoglosses have been established that clearly demarcate Bantu from its closest relatives. Right? Bantu languages. It says, what is a Bantu language? So I cited this text in another slide, but I'm back at it again, just with a different section. So readers may think that any language family or phylum ought to be definable in typological or historical genetic terms, that it should be possible to find a set of typological or genetic features that define it and set it apart from other families. It ought to be possible to find a set of features, a bundle of isoglosses that uniquely define the Bantu family within the Niger-Congo phylum. So far, this has proved that it has so far proved impossible to draw a clear line between Bantu, however defined, and non-Bantu Niger-Congo. The Northwest languages show non-Bantu features, while the relatives and neighbors show Bantu features. So you can reasonably argue that Yoruba's a Bantu language, Wolof's a Bantu language, Fulani's a Bantu language, et cetera, et cetera. So they're having problems trying to make the demarcation. So it continues in the text. For a third, the set of lexical items common to Niger Congo, we cannot decide what is Niger Congo and what is Bantu until the evidence is clearly set out. For the other three pronoun systems, order of sentence constituencies, order of noun phrase constituents, we have a good idea of what can be assumed for Proto-Bantu. But as there is not yet a consensus for Niger Congo, we cannot be sure which innovations occur between Niger Congo and Proto-Bantu. In the near future, a lexicon and a sound system may be tentatively established for Proto-Niger Congo, because if you did the genetic uh, groupings first using the comparative method, you would have had a Proto-Niger Congo, because you don't establish a genetic family until you've established the sound meaning correspondences and done the reconstructions first. That's another conversation for another day. The innovations defining Proto-Bantu within Niger Congo are less clear, because while internal Bantu evidence suggests features defining Proto-Bantu innovations, we do not yet know whether they define Proto-Bantu or a higher node. Therefore, whether narrow Bantu is really valid. At the time of writing, the suggestions above have not found universal approval.
Right.
So, we're sitting here arguing about Bantu language, if Bantu is legit or not.
So that definitely is directly affects any argument about Bantu migration. When
You
people
see
talk
what I'm
about
saying?
Bantu migration, right?
So,
Because that doesn't make sense.
one of the things that I keep trying to emphasize is that ideas and arguments that you think are solid coming out regarding African people and African languages is not. It's a whole bunch of mess and confusion that we have to start over from scratch. And so this is why. So this is when you hear like Ned or Ned talking that dumb stuff, talking about you can't use proto reconstructions in in comparisons. Is a bunch of BS. Matter of fact, I have a citation. Brilliant, white, dignified, pure-hearted, and clean white man, set of white men, Lyle Campbell and William J. Poser, right? So it says here, for attempts to establish more remote genetic affiliations, remember they are Indo-Europeanists. So I'm using this against Mboli as well, right? Because he likes to push that you don't use proto-reconstructions. That's not what the Indo-Europeanists do. Bullshit. That's why you got to read. You got to do a strong literature review. For attempts to establish more remote genetic affiliations, comparison with the reconstructed proto-form as a representative of the cognates and the cognate set from the across the related languages, and comparison with the individual words in the family-wide cognate set upon which reconstruction would be based are roughly equivalent, right? So this is why I'll use a Proto-Bantu reconstruction alongside ancient Egyptian, for example, or with Sumerian. Because I'm showing you that if there is a Bantu family, it is older than you think. It is not younger than ancient Egyptian. Proto-Bantu and Bantu languages are side by side with Egyptian, and that's why we're able to see. So what I'm doing is applying a falsibility test, a falsifiability test. And so I'm testing the reconstructions. If the reconstructions are solid, I should be able to use those reconstructions and do some comparisons with other languages outside of the sphere from which the reconstructions were initially developed. So that's why I use them against ancient Egyptian and Sumerian. They're the only ones that, if I use a Proto-Bantu reconstruction, I'm only using them against Egyptian and Sumerian, so that I can confirm their existence first and foremost, and their antiquity.
All right.
But people
mean,
don't understand stuff, and they just want to argue for the sake of arguing. But anyway, so I don't even know
I
what
don't
the
see
original
any.
question was.
No, because I mean, what you said, it directly affects the any arguments about Bantu migration and things like that. Bantu itself is not clearly defined like Niger Congo as a more macro, on the macro level, is not even a genetic reality. So these references, and that's the age-old saying, is that you can't build a house or you want to build something on a solid foundation. So if the foundation is made of sand and not solid bedrock or whatever, then everything you build on top of it can potentially just crumble. And that's something you definitely don't want to do. I know.
Built on pseudo. That's
pseudo.
The house that pseudo built. That's what this is.
The house that pseudo built. Now I know in debating league, in the debating team, we were taught that we would drill this in our head. You never acquiesce to a faulty premise, because in doing so, you will always be led to a faulty conclusion. And so if the foundation or the premise is shady, shaky, pseudo, anything you build and try to argue after that is going to suffer from the same fate. So that's the thing. Niger Congo, actually all 4 language phyla are not real genetic realities, linguistic genetic realities or units. Once people can get that in their head, then 90% of these arguments will just vanish. It just will, because now people will be forced to either do the work or watch the work being done. And that's it. That's it. That's where we at. So all you content people trying to use this stuff for content creation, just to be able to talk and stuff like that, time is up. So hopefully that comes across. But I don't see, any questions.
Even though we brought all these beautiful and dignified white PhD linguists to reinforce these arguments, they're going to move the goalposts and say, nope, only Jesus, and if they Muslim, only Allah can tell us if this is legitimate or not. Then after that, you just gotta just let them be.
And let alone the ChatGPT responses that I could pull up that agrees with everything that was said tonight. Even down to Christopher Ehret's Afroasiatic attempt, and how that fell short. All of these things, we just don't even have enough time. But anyway, so it's 10:40. We were rolling. So appreciate you coming through, Asar, and allowing me to pick your brain, to use it to demonstrate and answer these questions. And hopefully it can kind of clarify some things, and the way that hopefully MK, you'll be able to timestamp things where people can just go listen to it section by section. And because I'm actually just tired of repeating the same stuff over and over again. And so hopefully we can use this video to go in, at least have a foundation to build off of. If people have questions, then yeah, I'm all for that. I'm all for entertaining questions, but not the argument from ignorance. People who have not even read a single book in all of the 10 years, and even flip flop. We have people that has sat back and listened to this stuff and have agreed in the past with this information, but have now flip flop, call them flip floppers, flip now. And for life of me, I don't understand why, other than, maybe content creation, maybe just to spark some things. Google and YouTube, they paying some big dollars now. So, all right. But anyway, any closing remarks from you, Asar, Imhotep?
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to engage the community once again. And of course, you know, I am open to any questions in the future. You can put some in the comment section below this video, or you can hit me up on my website at osir.imhotep.com. That's OSIR. I know my name is normally spelled ASAR, but for the website, it's OSIR. Imhotep, IMHOTEP.com. And, you can hit me up there and I'll receive the email. And, or you can hit me up on Facebook under Osir Imhotep as well. But it's always good to share this information. I know that y'all have been hungering for it. And so just keep an open mind and even get the books. If you're interested in historical linguistics, get the books that you saw me post there. And so some of those books are actually step-by-step processes on how to do historical comparative linguistics. Once you read through that and you'll get a good sense of the stuff that we're talking about, then you'll be able to go along and be like, okay, I understand that. I came across that in that text. And you'll see the importance and the power of language studies, for African history, for reconstructing African history, language, and culture. And so, again, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you all for your questions. And y'all have a blessed night and rest of the week.
All right. Imhotep, you have any closing remarks?
Well, I would just like to thank Asar for gracing us with his presence and answering all these good questions, and also for you, Wujao, for asking those good questions that most of us couldn't come up with, but it's things that we want to know most of the time. And also for the people who participated today, and hopefully other people are going to participate later when watching this video. Make sure that you visit Asar's website, like you said, and the books. I put the links there, and make sure that you subscribe to our channel as well, so that you get more of these kind of shows that we will be presenting, and our Freestyle Fridays that we have reignited as well. So yeah, just that.
Okay, so yeah, I appreciate everyone who's tuned in. I'd like to thank Asar once again. And my hope is that at the very least, people will just learn to stay in their lane, at least when it comes to arguing, fussing, and fighting. And I always say this, that when you're in education mode and when you're in study mode, yes, step outside your lane. Like, explore, go to the frontier, go to uncharted territory, find out what you can, step outside your lane, roam around. But when you want to try to argue, debate, fuss, and fight, you have to stay in your lane. Don't try to argue, fuss, and fight from a place of ignorance. If you are not competent in an issue, subject, or topic, don't sit there and try to argue, fuss, and fight about it as if you are. That is the lamest, retardedest thing that people can do, and I see it a lot on these YouTube streets and on Facebook. And I think that's very detrimental to the growth of the body of knowledge that we all can participate in. There's nothing wrong with saying you don't know, and then begin to know. You know, that's it. So that's my hope, because a lot of these questions that I asked was based around that very fact. People are trying to argue, fuss, and fight, but don't have a clue to what mass comparison is, what multilateral comparison is, what typology is, you know, what a cognate is, what is the difference between a phylum, its plural phyla, and a language family. They don't even know that when we say languages are genetically related, that's not a sign for you to trigger biogenetic conversations. As soon as they hear the word language A and language B are genetically related, oh, well, what about haplotype or haplogroup A1B1B1B1B1B1B1A, 0.234567889? You know, all of a sudden it just triggers a bunch of biological genetic conversations that have nothing to do with genetic relatedness of languages and the process. So, you know, hopefully we can get over this. And I know, you know, this video is not the end all be all is gonna do it. But I need you all's help in the chat. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you definitely thumb up the video. Make sure you share it. And once we timestamp it, you know, when you find yourself in these conversations, just give the link with the timestamp, you know. And I'm sure that there may be some videos coming. Johnny Come Latelys may see this video and then want to make a YouTube video about something that's said, and that's fine. Everybody has a right to do that. But I guarantee you that it won't happen in real time and live. But it, you know, and unfortunately, they may stir confusion, because people will attempt to like Asar said, dig up something that's contrary or whatever the case is, and take things all out of context, use scientific jargon, scientific words out of their context, and everything. I've seen it for the past 10 years. So heads up on that. But other than that, I'm going to say I appreciate everybody tuning in, and thank everybody for tuning in. And so we'll see you all Friday. We're going to do another Freestyle Friday this Friday, so be prepared to participate with that. And again, I want to thank Imhotep, thank Emikaraku Kinshaye Kinyi, and that is it. Oh, Asar, with all those examples of language families being parallel to Asar, Imhotep, and Mika, you know, having children and stuff like that. I mean, well, you know, what's now, let me just I know it's like,
that was the only
hypothetically
in the chat. Yeah, it's hypothetically. I don't.
I know. I'm just messing. I'm just trying to. I'm poking at Mika in the chat. I bet you she gonna type something. All right. Anyway, appreciate y'all. Peace, and see you all Saturday. We are definitely out. Peace.
When you go to chemist school, you became more alert. You made wake up, your spirit wake up, and you became a more human being. That's your character is built in a school. Classical studies, we must know nature. You see, maybe in the future we need to know some heretic too. We need to know nature. achievement in Kemet for me is education. The way they think, they build, and they practice their education is very unique in history. Without education, I believe there will be no Kemet.